I'm going to call this meeting to order. We're still waiting for one witness, but when Ms. Walker arrives, we can fit her into the schedule. But we will be taking 10-minute presentations from each presenter, and and then there will be 2 rounds of questioning, 2 rounds. At the end of that, then we'll switch witnesses. So welcome, everyone, to the 20th meeting of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, study on the evolution of the television industry in Canada and its impact on local communities. We have our first witness, the Alliance de la Francophonie de Timmins. Mr. Lacroix, please.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I am pleased to appear before you for once again. I think we're becoming friends because this isn't the first time we meet. The topic of the study is very important for local communities. As you know, the concentration of media is such that we have little voice in a national media and also in the regional media. And so we only have local media to express our views. So we're here before you to see whether we can improve the situation in the local media. The Francophone community outside of Quebec in the north is in even greater difficulty because there were major cuts to CBC Radio-Canada, which is our local television and radio broadcaster. Our Francophone newspaper, Les Nouvelles of Timmins, has also seen cutbacks and is now inserted into the daily press. So we need to be able to talk to our community about our needs, but doing so is becoming increasingly difficult and our means are more limited. It is important, therefore, that the federal government develop a policy which will allow local media to maintain their operations and continue doing their work. Among the recommendations, and I will be giving the floor to my colleague from Kirkland Lake, but 2 of the recommendations that we believe would be interesting to follow up on is that the federal government ensure local buys in local media outlets, which could represent up to 50% of the budget for local communities and local advertising. Another important aspect for rural communities across Canada is the presence of the national public broadcaster, which in many cases is the only contact with other communities. It's the only network that exists in certain regions. We believe that the government should adopt a 2-stream policy. One, that CBC Radio-Canada be based more in the local communities and perhaps less in the 3 major centres of Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. As well, we believe there should be increased base funding to $50 per capita. If we look at what's happening in Europe, you have up to $134 in some country. And so these are 2 of our recommendations. I would prefer answering your questions instead of undertaking a long presentation. And I want to thank you again for having invited a Francophone association which represents local communities. Media is very important to us, especially local media, in order to express our messages. And I think it's time that we have a voice around the table. My colleague from Kirkland Lake will continue the presentation, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. I represent the Timiskaming James Bay area. With regard to French language television, we're served by Radio-Canada, TVA, TQS. However, they're all based in Montreal, so we don't get news coverage from Toronto, for instance. very little is said or heard about our region. In Rouyn-Noranda, Val-d'Or, and such areas, little is heard about our community, and very little of Kirkland Lake and Temiskaming Lakeshore. There is also TFO, which is an Ontario television station, but is mainly an educational network. With regard to radio broadcasting, CBOM Sudbury is a French language station, but because of recent cutbacks, it is no longer present in the regions. So from Sudbury in the outlying regions, when you're in Kirkland Lake, unless there's a natural disaster, well, there's no coverage. With regard to English language stations, there's CJK, CJTT, Temiskaming Lakeshore, and we're also served from the Quebec side, from Ville-Marie Québécois, which offers a limited number of services at certain times of the week, but doesn't serve our region per se. As for local newspapers, there are no French language newspapers. We were served by Les Nouvelles de Timmins, but as Sylvain indicated, that is now an insert in the Timmins English newspaper and is no longer distributed in our area. There's the Northern News, the English language newspaper for Kirkland Lake, and the Temiskaming Speaker for Temiskaming Lakeshore. That basically is to say that there are very little means to have our activities, our small victories noticed or covered, unless it is in another language than our own. So that forces Francophones to buy the English language papers in order to understand what's going on in their region. Thank you.
We move now to the campaign for democratic media. And Mr. Lithgow? Okay.
Yeah, let's go. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to these hearings. I'm here on behalf of the Campaign for Democratic Media, a national, nonprofit, and nonpartisan media advocacy group. We're a network of individual Canadians, civil society organizations, consumer organizations, labor groups, media advocacy groups, academics, grassroots media activists, and others interested in helping to create a diverse, accountable, and quality Canadian media system. These hearings have been constituted in response to a perceived crisis in Canadian broadcasting, a perfect storm, some have called it, of new media challenges to traditional business models and economic contraction of historic proportions. The Canadian television sector is undergoing what many commentators suggest will be permanent and structural transformation. One of the things we would like the committee to think about today is the possibility that what we are experiencing as a crisis in local broadcasting reflects, in fact, some of the inherent tensions between the cultural industries and democratic accountability. What I mean is that the critical importance of local programming in Canada is in all likelihood better understood in terms of what makes cultures democratic than it is in terms of sorting out the conflicts between local versus regional and national advertising markets. When we talk about broadcasting in Canada, we are talking about part of the connective tissue that holds us together culturally, politically, and economically. It is finding solutions that do not sacrifice one for the other of these equally important aspects of Canadian society that we believe should be at the heart of these proceedings. To begin, we'd like to challenge certain assumptions about what is happening in Canadian broadcasting. There are broad economic factors at work, as well as changes in consumption patterns in connection with new media technologies that have helped to precipitate the crisis. But there are also structural factors that go to the core of the current crisis that are at risk of being overlooked, problems which we think point towards creative and long-term solutions. For instance, local markets may not be failing so much as they're being ignored. The network affiliates threatened with closure who broadcast in these small markets have increasingly been forced to serve national network needs. Networks whose accumulated corporate debts and revenue strategies make small market sustainability impossible without doing away with much of local programming. Small markets can be, and in fact are, profitable. The problem is that they are not profitable enough to serve non-local needs. CanWest Global, for instance, is struggling to make decisions about local broadcasting while trying to service almost $4 billion of corporate debt. To put it bluntly, the citizens of many smaller communities are facing drastic losses of local programming, one, because of corporate decisions that have absolutely nothing to do with their community, and two, because there are so few alternatives in our broadcasting system. We have one of the least diverse broadcast systems in the world and highest concentrations of media ownership. Canadians lack meaningful local broadcasting choices, and their ability to be informed about their own communities is being held hostage by corporate debt and corporate demands for rates of return that are unachievable. Part of the problem is that local affiliated stations function within national networks primarily as a means for national advertisers to access local eyeballs. Revenue streams depend on national advertising markets, not local markets. Advertising rates in local settings reflect national markets for national advertisers, and as such, they end up prohibitively high and, in fact, exclude local businesses from the market. We are suggesting that the current model of affiliated local broadcasters is failing Canadians not only in terms of local programming, but in terms of local advertising opportunities. These markets may not be big enough to achieve network goals for debt, but they are big enough to sustain alternative models for the production of local television. The large affiliated centralized model for delivering local programming doesn't work, and arguably it never has. As long as there have been license renewal hearings, there have been desperate cries to reduce local programming obligations. We need to rethink the ways in which local programs can be produced and delivered in local settings. Perhaps the most important point that we want to make today is that there is a largely unrecognized and emergent element in the Canadian broadcasting system that we believe offers the most realistic long-term solution to the crisis in local programming. The Broadcast Act in Section 3 identifies three elements that make up the Canadian broadcasting system: public, private, and community. The community sector is rarely addressed, and yet it is here that we find new media programming strategies and hybrid models of organization that point the way forward to long-term sustainable local programming solutions. These hybrid models of organization, what are sometimes called mandate-driven media or civil society media, combine market responsiveness with professional journalistic practices and a strong ethical mandate to fulfill democratic roles such as ensuring that public and private institutions remain accountable to the public and that the public has access to accurate, reliable, diverse, and independent sources of news and information about the communities where they live. These are not, to be clear, volunteer media organizations. They are media who work on multiple bottom lines, ethical and economic. Because they are mandate-driven, small profit margins don't equal failure, but rather an opportunity. These hybrid models of media combine entrepreneurial ingenuity with NGO commitment to public objectives and resourcefulness. In the United Kingdom, they operate under the name of Community Interest Companies, or CICs. They are for-profit companies whose rates of return are capped and whose purposes for incorporation include community service. In addition, and importantly, the assets of the company are locked and cannot be sold except to another CIC. There are thousands of CICs incorporated in the UK carrying out a range of services: affordable housing, the arts, education and training, preschools, home support services, recycling, and media groups. A similar approach has been taken in the U.S. with the creation of low-profit limited liability companies, or what are called L3Cs. They guarantee the public nature of their work and limit dividends to investors through operating agreements. To quote Richard Bridge and Stacey Corriveau from a recent report, the primary goal of L3Cs and CICs is to introduce market solutions to community needs by providing access to vast pools of market-driven wealth to make socially responsible investments. Local broadcasting is an excellent opportunity for socially responsible investment, a way for the tension between democratic and industrial needs that has so far stifled local programming to be addressed. In Canada, one example of a hybrid solution is the Community Broadcast License. These are television stations locally owned, either for-profit or not-for-profit, who exist to service local audience, information, and advertising needs. These community broadcasters are not owned by cable companies, although their signals must be carried on local cable systems. These are independently owned and operated television stations who exist specifically to provide local programming within their broadcast footprints. There are currently 10 in Canada: CIMC TV, or Teleel Community Television in Cape Breton, CHCT TV, or St. Andrews Community Television in New Brunswick, CHET TV in Chetwynd, British Columbia, CHMG TV in the city of Quebec, to name just a few. The Local Programming Improvement Fund should be made available for use by these organizations and to assist new mandate-driven community broadcasters to fill the vacuum in local programming. Toward this end, in addition to LPIF funds being made available for community broadcast programming, a portion of the fund should be allocated to one-time grants that assist in the startup of new community media outlets. There are also possibilities for hybrid new media strategies, online contributions by mandate-driven media production groups who focus on local programs for local audiences. As many commentators have noted, in recent months, more and more Canadians source programming through the Internet. Resources should be made available through tools like the Local Programming Improvement Fund to support locally oriented media production groups who distribute primarily online. These are, in fact, the ways that our broadcast system is growing and where entrepreneurial innovation is leading the way in transforming structural changes into opportunities. These groups can provide locally driven, creative solutions to local program deficiencies. A key role that the federal government can play in response to these opportunities is to initiate legislative reform that would allow the incorporation of limited liability for-profit corporations, the L3Cs, as has been done in Vermont and is being considered in Georgia, Illinois, Michigan, Montana, North Carolina, Oregon, Wyoming, as well as at the federal level. We also recommend that the Local Programming Improvement Fund be increased in size through matching federal government funds. This would make more resources available to address the crisis in local programming, and it gives Canadians, through our representative system, more say in how these resources are spent. The Local Programming Improvement Fund should also be made expressly accessible not only to the affiliated networks, but to community broadcasters, independent program producers, and online local media groups. This is an opportunity for Canadians to expand capacity and diversity in the Canadian broadcasting system for the production and distribution of local programs. The model of broadcasting dominated by a few networks with strings of affiliated stations has failed Canadians. New models with greater local accountability and diversity should be encouraged. Further, we recommend that management of the Local Programming Improvement Fund be as diverse as the Canadian broadcast system, including representation from the public, private, and community elements, including representation from independent producers and community broadcasters. Control of the fund must reflect the broadcast system's diversity, especially representation from sectors where the innovation can be found. We recommend, as we did in the CRTC's new media broadcast hearings, that the federal government create an internet broadcast fund to support the production of Canadian content. We further recommend that the federal government conduct an audit of community channel funds. Community television in Canada last year received $115 million, almost double the size of the proposed Local Programming Improvement Fund. This money is required by regulation to be spent on the production and distribution of local reflection television. However, communities across Canada have been complaining that cable companies misuse these resources by restricting or disallowing community access. If the federal government is proposing to fix the crisis in local programming with a $60 million fund, we must ask what has been happening with the $115 million that cable companies collect from Canadians. On the matter of funding for broadcasters in general, on the one hand,
Quickly wrap it up, please.
quickly wrap it up. Okay, I guess a copy of this will be distributed because we summarize all of the recommendations. I just want to end with this.
No more translation for me.
Okay, I don't know if a copy has been distributed to everyone, but we can see that it is. If you can.
But it will be. That's fine. I just want to
Yes.
end very quickly with a story that probably most of you are familiar with. In Hamilton, and it's an indication of why the current structure is failing Canadians and why this other sector of the Canadian broadcast system, we think, offers opportunities for long-term solutions. In Hamilton, CanWest Global's local affiliate, CHTV, CanWest announced that they wanted to either close it or sell it. The Hamilton community rallied to save its only local broadcaster. They brought together the requisite technical expertise, capital investment, support from local representatives from all levels of government. The only thing left was for CanWest to sell the license, just like CTV recently did with Shaw and their e-channels. But CanWest didn't sell the license to the community group. They've gone to the CRTC to request significant reductions in local programming. It suggests that Hamilton's communities have cynically been used as bargaining chips. holding their local programming hostage in exchange for significant reductions in local programming commitments. Whether or not this is the case, the network is using the crisis to reduce its local programming obligations, while a local initiative with a local focus, local ownership, and a viable business plan and sufficient capitalization is being frozen out. That's the problem. Communities have very different interests in local broadcasting than national networks and international media groups. We need to find a way to help locally owned initiatives who are aimed at creating and maintaining independent broadcasting and programming, and we believe that our recommendations are a step in this direction.
Okay, thank you. And I do remind people that we try to stick a little closer to 10 minutes. We went almost 14 minutes that time. Mr. Morrison, please, from the Friends of Canadian Broadcasting.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais suivre votre conseil.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll follow your advice regarding the 10 minutes.
Pour la programmation canadienne.
Friends of Canadian Broadcasting is an independent watchdog for Canadian programming in the English language audiovisual system, supported by 100,000 Canadians. Thank you for granting us an opportunity to appear before you today.
Television model, acquiring U.S. network programming, wrapping Canadian ads around them, subsidizing Canadian programming with the resulting profits, is failing. Canadian over-the-air broadcasters are competing to bid up the cost of U.S. programming at the same time as their audience is declining. And now they also report that local news programming is no longer profitable. As you know, advertisers follow audiences. Over the past decade, a major shift has taken place within the advertising pie. Web advertising has increased in Canada from $25 million in 1998 to $1.5 billion in 2008. CRTC data confirm that profits of the private over-the-air television have been falling steadily to the point where by mid-2008, the entire industry delivered negligible profit. What might initially have been considered a cyclical downturn has now emerged as a major structural change threatening the viability of over-the-air television. The over-the-air broadcasters are telling the CRTC and your committee that audience is down, advertising is down, costs are up, transition to digital is not affordable, and Canadian programming obligations are unsustainable. While some have questioned the need for over-the-air television delivery in future, Parliament and the CRTC have a responsibility to consider the needs of 3 million Canadians who rely on over-the-air reception. In a report commissioned by the Department of Canadian Heritage, Canadian Media Research, Inc. concludes that, and I'm quoting, given the slowing trend in the past 4 to 5 years, it seems unlikely that the over-the-air segment will decline by much in the coming years, unquote. In other words, over-the-air viewing by millions of Canadians will continue to be a feature of our audiovisual system well into the future. Cities with over-the-air viewing exceeding the Canadian average include Windsor at 27%, Saskatoon 15%, Montreal 14%, Quebec and Sherbrooke 13%. Even in cities with a lower proportion of over-the-air viewing, the number of viewers is substantial. For example, Toronto, 477,000, Vancouver, 138,000, Edmonton, 113, Ottawa, 111,000. CMRI also reports that even in households subscribing to a cable or satellite service, not all television sets are hooked up to the cable satellite service. Over-the-air viewing accounted for 25% of TVO's audience in 2006, 16% for CBC English television, 14% for CTV, and 8% for Global. With the advent of digital over-the-air conversion in 2011, many of these Canadians will have an incentive to become cable or satellite customers, although the CMR study indicates that 26% of over-the-air viewers cannot afford the cable and satellite charges. Digital conversion may be expected to increase the profitability of the distributors at a time when over-the-air television providers are in crisis. As you know, in the United States of America, the federal government provided a coupon program to subsidize the purchase of digital converters. Why has no similar program been announced in Canada? And what about financial assistance to over-the-air broadcasters to help with the one-time cost of digital conversion? Even a small portion of the revenue from reselling the vacated analog frequencies would easily pay for this. Public policy should recognize the vital contribution that Canadian over-the-air stations make to the cultural fabric of Canada and create conditions for sustainable, therefore profitable, over-the-air services. This can only be done by ensuring that over-the-air television has the financial capacity to produce local Canadian programming. Canadians rely on their local television stations for news about their communities, the kind of local coverage that specialty channels cannot provide. In April of 2008, Friends and several partners commissioned and submitted to the CRTC a Polara study on Canadians' views on deregulating cable and other TV distributors, which reported the results of a survey of 1,200 cable and satellite subscribers. Page 32 demonstrates that the Canadians consider local news their top television priority. And there's a graphic, Mr. Chair, which makes that clear. At a policy hearing last year, the CRTC heard evidence from Nanos Research that 78% of respondents indicated that having local news was of high or very high value to them. And the CMRI 2008 TV Trends and Quality Survey, a report on Canadians' attitudes towards TV, to which Friends subscribes, offers corroborating data. I won't go through it, it's there. Local news, amongst Anglophone viewers at least, is by far the most important service available on television. And as you know, local programming is most threatened in smaller and medium-sized communities where there is often only one local source. Maintaining local programming on over-the-air television requires a change in the economic model. The CRTC's Local Programming Improvement Fund, though a laudable initiative, is far too small to address this challenge. Polara found that a majority of cable and satellite subscribers would be willing to pay $3 more per month to protect and enhance Canadian programming. You can see the data in the graphic. Friends believes that over-the-air television should be resourced on a level playing field with the specialty channels. Over-the-air television networks should have access to the second revenue stream, a fee for carriage, provided they promise to use at least a portion of the money to maintain and enhance local programming. We propose that the networks commit to a three-way split among local or drama programming, 1/3, digital conversion costs, and the bottom line until 2011. And thereafter, the split should be 2/3 to drama or local programming and 1/3 to their bottom line. Cable monopolies should not be permitted to generate very substantial profits from the sale of their cable profits driven by the over-the-air stations without being obliged to pay for the services that they then resell. Friends recommends that cable monopolies should be permitted to pass along this charge to their subscribers only if their profit before interest and tax were to descend below 15%. We also propose that the CBC should abandon ads on TV except during professional sports coverage. Reducing the supply of advertising avails would assist the private television business. In return for vacating ads on non-sports programs, CBC television should be refinanced either by a levy on cable or satellite distributors, to be determined by the CRTC, or through general government revenues or by some combination of the two. This would transform CBC television into a genuine public broadcaster. This new approach could be phased in over several years, and there is substantial evidence that Canadians would approve of this reform. A number of current members of this committee participated actively in a year-long review of the future role of the national public broadcaster during the last Parliament. You, Mr. Chair, were the chair of that committee. Last year, your committee recommended in Defining Distinctiveness in a Changing Media Landscape report that per capita annual funding for public broadcasting should be increased from $33 to $40, which, by the way, would bring Canada to half the average in Western democracies. Last month, in a poll of 3,361 Canadians, which Friends commissioned, Polara found that 54% of Canadians support your recommendation, 26% reject it as too high, and 20% consider it to be too low. In other words, 3/4 of Canadians believe annual support to the CBC should rise to at least $40 per Canadian per year. We also want to share with you a second finding from the recent poll. Polara asked the following question. Assume for a moment that your federal Member of Parliament asked for your advice on an upcoming vote in the House of Commons on what to do about CBC funding. Which of the following three options would you advise him or her to vote for? And one was increasing funding to the CBC from current levels. A second was maintaining funding for the CBC at current levels. A third was decrease funding for the CBC from current levels. And as you'll see in the graphic, 47% of Canadians would advise members of Parliament to increase it. 31 would keep it the same, 9 would decrease it, and 13% have no view. Now, Mr. Chair, I just want to conclude by saying that you can imagine our concern when we recently learned that Minister Moore's April 29th assurance the CBC cuts does not square with the facts. That concerned us greatly. And je vais conclure par dire merci.
And I will conclude by saying thank you for your attention and my best wishes in your important deliberations. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Welcome to the table our next witness on screen, Manitoba Incorporated. And I asked Ms. Walker, please, to lead off.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the Standing Committee. My name is Tara Walker. I'm the Executive Director of On Screen Manitoba, which is the independent production industry association for Manitoba. Presenting with me is Kim Todd. She's the chair of our board, and she's the president of Original Pictures, an independent production company based in Winnipeg in Manitoba. Kim has been producing television for over 20 years. She started as a senior producer with Atlantis Films in Toronto, and she's produced Canadian classics such as The Diviners, A Bear Named Winnie for CBC, both, and fun primetime series like Falcon Beach for Global and ABC Family in the United States. We represent the film, television, and new media community in Manitoba. Our membership covers the entire production industry in our province, from the creators, that's the producers, writers, directors, to the technical and creative craftspeople that are represented by labor groups, the service and goods suppliers, and the broadcasters in our region. Our mission is to lead, build, and represent the production industry in Manitoba. We appreciate this opportunity to address you at such a critical time in the evolution of our industry. We agree with the Canadian Film and Television Production Association, the CFTPA, in their assertion that television broadcasting in Canada is now at a crossroads, and that key decisions made by officials over the next term will lay the foundation for the future of our industry and for the system for the next generation of Canadians. We also agree with the Canadian independent producers. We also agree that the Canadian independent producers are the cornerstones of the system, as is the content they produce. Independent production is a means of ensuring that our broadcast system is diverse, distinctively Canadian, and inclusive of local communities.
We address you today as members of a distinct and vibrant local community located at the very centre of Canada, Winnipeg, Manitoba. Our city and our province contain many of the diverse cultures and voices that define our country, and we've developed a mature production industry that has brought those voices into our broadcasting system. With our unmatched financial incentives, our tax credits are the highest in Canada, our internationally renowned production companies and crews, and the strong support of the province and the city, we're able to offer broadcasters top-quality original regional programming at bargain prices. Regional independent producers are part of the solution to the economic difficulties of conventional broadcasters. We do not accept the argument that Canadian broadcasters should carry less Canadian and regional content as a means of relieving their current economic problems. The purpose of the Canadian broadcasting system and of these hearings, as we understand it, is to build a healthy production and broadcast industry that can create and deliver Canadian content to Canadian audiences, as decreed in the Broadcasting Act. The independent production community from across the country provides content for that system, and the broadcasters deliver it to Canadians. We are a partnership, dependent on each other for the overall health and quality of our service to Canadians.
Our production community in Manitoba is the fourth largest in Canada, after Toronto, Vancouver, and then Montreal. Over the last decade, Manitoba has grown faster than any other established production centre in Canada. Our total volume of film and television has more than doubled, from 68 million to 143. We provide over 1,500 full-time jobs for Manitobans, and we contribute approximately $100 million to our economy each year. In fact, soon to be published in our economic impact study, Snapshot, will show that $1 million spent on production in Manitoba results in 27 person-years of employment. That's a higher rate of job creation than most of the other major industries in Manitoba, including transportation equipment manufacturing, furniture manufacturing, construction, mining, and real estate services. It's important also to note that Manitoba is 2,000 kilometers from most of Canada's film and television decision makers in Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, and without any direct air links to Los Angeles or New York. Our success is a testament to the passion and the drive of our local producers to get their stories told.
Although we have a strong, well-established production community, one that can be seen as a microcosm of our national community, Manitoba's industry is one of the most vulnerable to the current trends towards centralization and consolidation. We are, if you like, the canary in the mine shaft. When the broadcasters pull back economically, we feel it first. They stop traveling to see us as travel funds get tight. They object to regional spending as being a restriction on them. They consolidate positions so there's no one in the local stations that has anything to do with programming or commissioning. Historically, Manitoba was home to a number of family-run broadcast ventures, including the Moffat family's CKY, now a CTV station, the pioneering Women's Television Network, WTN, which is now a Chorus station, the Thiessen's Trinity Television, which is now an SFOX station, the Craig's A-Channel franchise, also CTV at the moment, and the Asper's CKND Global Network. All of these except CKND have been swallowed up by bigger owners, and all of the programming decision makers have been moved to larger centres. Independent producers are an entrepreneurial lot, and we've been out there on the frontier for some time now, creating for new media, using digital technology, delivering our productions in high definition, and tapping into international financing to pay for them, and international markets to sell them. We recognize that a perfect storm of social, cultural, technological, and economic change is causing the rapid evolution of our industry, in fact of our society and our world. We are very busy trying to find our place and the place of our Canadian programs in that world. Ideally, we see the Canadian broadcasters as partners for us in this venture. Now, the producer's job is to find or create the idea for a show, then interest a Canadian broadcaster in licensing it for broadcast in Canada. The Canadian Television Fund stipulates that the minimum license fee for a prime-time 1-hour Canadian drama series per hour is $315,000. That means $4,095,000 for a standard 13-episode series order would be what a Canadian broadcaster would pay. Now, the total cost of that hour is $1.5 or $2 million, and the total cost of that series is $19.5 or $26 million. The producer has to find the rest of the financing after the four. So the producer's left to find $15 to $22 million. We don't object to that, but we need it to be recognized that we're doing an awful lot of work getting that content made. The producer has to take out a bank loan to finance the contracts and tax credits that will not be paid until after the show is made. And the producer is liable for that bank loan, for any budget overages, and he has to hold back his fee until all other costs and risks are covered. The producer takes the insurance, the producer protects the employees, the producer is the owner of the product, the broadcaster licenses it or rents it for 5 years or 7 years, whatever the term is, to show it on Canadian television. The producer has to go to France, Germany, Italy, wherever else in the world to raise the rest of the money and to make sales to pay back the investors. The broadcaster's job is to attract an audience to the show in Canada. This is done by scheduling, making sure it's aired at a time when its audience is watching, and promotion and advertising so the audience knows it's there. Now, often on Canadian private broadcasters, American shows are scheduled first so they can be simulcast with the U.S. networks, and Canadian shows are given the time slots that are left. Canadian shows seldom receive the promotion that U.S. shows get. And then if the Canadian show gets disappointing ratings, the conclusion is that Canadian shows do not attract audiences and do not make money. But these statements have been both these statements have been recently made in support of the idea of, quote, relieving the broadcasters of their obligations to air Canadian shows. Yet, when the Canadian series Flashpoint is given the budget, the time slot, and the promotion normally given to a U.S. show, it is a hit, of which we're all very proud. In this digital world where the audience can get American shows on the web, Canadian broadcasters' unique brand will be built around their Canadian shows. We do not think Canadian productions are the problem. We think they are the solution.
At On Screen Manitoba, we're investigating a broadcast project that would be an example of the kind of local initiatives that arise across the country. An educational broadcaster or webcaster that would use low-cost digital technology to connect the far-flung communities of our province, offering high-quality education and training opportunities as well as entertainment. Projects like this might take the pressure off of national broadcasters to carry local content. This could be one of the solutions, but it's not here yet, and local programming is still something that our communities need. Our local programming from the OTA private broadcasters in Manitoba is as follows. Global runs a half-hour news show daily, which is packaged in Alberta. City TV, that's Rogers, runs breakfast television, a talk and news show daily. CKY, which is City, or CTV, runs a half-hour news show that's cycled 3 times a day. And that's it. If local programming is defined as local information, political coverage, cultural reflection, we would weigh in as viewers here and say that the cuts in staff and resources mean that civic politics is pretty much left to the newspapers, and even provincial politics is not covered in any depth. Analysis, reflection, and debate have all but disappeared from the news. Given that, newspapers themselves are shrinking, we fear that the essential political and social discourse of our community is not being served. If the Local Programming Improvement Fund is going to be used to meet the needs of the local broadcasters, then we suggest that a portion of it be designated for other voices outside of the broadcasters themselves. We also would like to state that if the fund is set at a higher percentage, that any increase doesn't go to rebalance the BDU contributions towards the Canadian Television Fund. Kim?
We have to wrap up pretty quickly.
We will wrap up then. In summary, we'd like to leave you with 3 points. Independent producers are the cornerstone of the Canadian television industry, and regional producers within the group provide the diversity of voices that make it a truly national industry. 2, as an example of a regional production community, Manitoba shows that we can build viable centres of production outside of Toronto and Montreal that add diversity, creative and financial value to the national system. We offer our local community a voice. Finally, in the longer term, we need a digital media strategy for Canada. We encourage you to support the CFTPA's call for national consultations on this issue, and we thank the committee for inviting us to appear, and we look forward to answering any questions you have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we're going to try to keep as close as we can the questions and answers. Try not to go too long. Keep a little bit of an eye on me. I'll hold my pencil up. It's close to 5 minutes. Mr. Rodriguez first, please.
Monsieur le Président, encore une fois, je veux vous...
Mr. Chair, once again, I'll ask you to be very strict with myself as well as with my other colleagues.
Monsieur Lacroix, je vais commencer avec vous. Vous avez dit que
Lacroix, I'll begin with you. You said that you need a policy for a local media buys. Does that mean that we should increase the government's advertising envelope, or with the same advertising envelope, increase the funding to the regions? I think we could start with the same envelope. I think it is be essential that to support local media, and we're talking about those who are serving communities directly, that those local media receive a greater share. And very briefly, media belong to multinationals, which is a problem in our region of Timmins-Kirkland Lake, and often money does not reach a local media. Mr. Morrison, you have an in-depth understanding of CBC Radio Canada. You also know its budgeting. You're aware of the latest budget. I'm trying to clarify something. The government said that it has increased the CBC Radio Canada's budget. However, when we look at the budget, and I asked the minister this, in the latest budget we see a $62.8 million budget cut. So how can you reconcile those two positions?
That I better understand. I think what I was sitting across the hall when you had a communication with Minister Moore just 2 weeks ago, and in it you, as I recall, held up the main estimates, which showed a 5.6% cut to the budget of the CBC. Minister Moore consulted his deputy and acknowledged that that was in fact what was in the main estimates, but indicated to you that the government was going to supplement that with $60 million. I believe that has not yet happened, but I presume that we could take him at his word. But on Friday, CBC has many qualities. One of them is that its employees leak like sieves, Mr. Rodriguez. And
I'll get that to that later.
Okay.
That's my next question. I just want to finish this.
Okay.
One.
So altogether,
but I just want to make sure. So if CBC gets this 60 million, so there's no cut of 60 million, but it's even. There's no increase at all, right? So at best case scenario, it's even. Worst case scenario, they lose $60 million.
Well, if you take purchasing power into account, which is something that is done over time to factor inflation in order to find out what a dollar will buy, you will find that CBC has been getting less federal purchasing power from its grant over the years pretty well consistently. We've done an analysis over the last 20 years, and it has been continuing to go down. And I think that's the meaningful statistic, Mr. Rodriguez, that you should keep your eye on, rather than the non-inflation dollars.
Okay. Maintenant, ce qu'on lit aujourd'hui, c'est que dans
what we've read today is that in a strategic review, the government could reduce Radio Canada funding even more. We're talking about $56 additional million. So that's another 5% cut out of the $1.1 billion appropriation provided by Ottawa. Now, I've read your statement. You said that Moore misled Parliament and the public when he said there would be no new cuts. So if Mr. Lacroix is right in that there's a strategic review and that CBC Radio Canada sees an added reduction of 5% in its funding, so that's $56 million. What would be the impact on staff? Would there be another round of job cuts?
He's in a crisis right now. Huh? I mean, they've laid off 10% of their staff. And so it's not a very good time to ask them to amputate more. I am aware that the Federal Treasury Board has this exercise that a variety of government departments and agencies go through. I just felt, Mr. Rodriguez, that it was unfortunate that at this time when CBC is in a crisis, they would be asked to consider further cuts. And I sat in the room 2 weeks ago when you asked Minister Moore if he could guarantee that CBC would be receiving the money, and he told you that that he could. And at least that's what I heard, Mr. Rodriguez, and I was very disappointed to see that, that this happened.
Ce qui est inquiétant, très rapidement, ce qui est inquiétant, lorsque M. Lacroix
It is worrisome when Mr. Lacroix appeared before the committee. He said that for every dollar in lost revenue, the CBC has to cut $1 to balance its budget, which means that tomorrow morning there would be many job cuts to compensate for that cut.
Through me to Mr. Rodriguez, because the 5 minutes is up. Ms. Lavallée, please.
Merci.
Thank you. Mr. Morrison, I have a question for you. I know you have a good understanding of CBC Radio Canada, and perhaps you could help us decode the minister's word. What the minister says and does, it does not seem to balance out. For instance, the best example is the one you gave today, when the minister, when he last appeared before our committee, said that indeed he did not intend to make additional cuts. And as part of a strategic review, is asking CBC Radio Canada to identify 5% in additional cuts, up to $56 million. You know that the Conservatives applaud in the House of Commons whenever we talk about the disappearance of CBC Radio Canada. And even here in committee, the questions by our Conservative colleagues are very harsh towards the corporation. We don't feel any empathy or any assistance. When the minister is asked about these questions, he says that he maintains the Conservative government's commitment during the last election campaign. But it seems that the second part of his sentence, but we will not ever again take such a commitment, that is to maintain the corporation's funding. So how do you decode the minister's words? Do you feel that the Conservative government wants to assist CBC Radio Canada maintain its budget?
Is nonpartisan, and sometimes that is actually difficult. And in the years that I have been doing my job, I've had reason to criticize this government and a Liberal government, and also what was then known as a progressive Conservative government. But I will be very candid with you, Madame Lavallée, and that is I detect in the current government two discordant messages. During the last election campaign, a Conservative fundraising letter came into our hands, which talked about, which asked about, do you think that the money that's being spent on CBC is being well spent or not? And it caused us to actually commission a public opinion poll from Nanos Research to find that Canadians' answer was 63% yes and 25% no. We asked the Prime Minister to give his answer to the question. He wouldn't. So Minister Moore says good things, things that I would want a heritage minister to say about public broadcasting, but there are other messages from the government, and I thought that Mr. Rodriguez's question 2 weeks ago and Minister Moore's response put that to rest. Effectively, Mr. Rodriguez used the word guarantee. Would you give the committee a guarantee? And the minister said yes. And then to read on Friday that now the CBC is once again being put through an exercise which could lead to a 5% cut 12 months from now, I thought that was most unfortunate and inconsistent with his guarantee. Okay.
Est-ce que vous trouvez que c'est cohérent avec ce qu'une personne, avec ce que...
Find that as consistent, regardless of the stripes of the minister. I don't want to get you into a partisan debate, but regardless of the minister's stripes, do you find it normal that on one side he tells committee members that he doesn't intend to cut, and then he turns around and he asks the president and CEO of Radio Canada, CBC, to find an additional 5% in cuts?
Which is something like hitting them when they're down, if you know that expression. And it would seem to be an inappropriate time if the government had any discretion to impose such an exercise on the national public broadcaster when it is in a crisis.
Quelle est votre principale recommandation pour...
What is your main recommendation to assist Radio Canada CBC?
Actually, an idea from Prime Minister Harper, when he was the Leader of the Opposition, he made a speech to the Canadian Association of Broadcasters, I have it here, where he said that he thought that CBC television should withdraw, and I mentioned this in my remarks, should withdraw from the advertising market except when it is broadcasting professional sports, and that would help the private sector by changing supply-demand, and in return that CBC should be provided with stable, long-term funding. The words are right in his speech, and I think that that would be a very good idea, because right now on both SRC television and CBC television on the English side, too much of their activity is chasing audiences for advertisers, and too little is doing what public broadcasters do in other Western democracies.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Angus.
Thank you, Mr. President. Monsieur Lacroix, combien y a-t-il les francophones?
Lacroix, how many francophones live in Northern Ontario? Is the number of francophones in Northwest comparable to the number of francophones in the area of Abitibi-Témiscamingue in Quebec? Is it comparable? Well, I don't have the figures, but if you take the northwest of Ontario, there's 125,000 francophones. And if you add the northwest, we talk about 175,000 francophones, approximately, throughout all communities. So in the northern region, there are a lot of francophone communities, small communities that are remote, isolated, rural, but there is a lack of media voices in northern regions. So you're dependent on this Radio Canada for entertainment, culture, and francophone news. What do you see the impact to be on the cuts to the national broadcaster? Well, I'm not a specialist in cuts to CBC Radio Canada, but if we look at the latest cuts that were announced, because of the lack of advertising revenue, the only show that was devoted to public affairs in French-speaking Ontario was a 30-minute show on Radio Canada, and that was cut. As for the Windsor region, and there used to be a francophone local station there, everything basically was cut. And you know that Radio Canada is an amalgamation between a French and an English network. The fact that Windsor and Thunder Bay will be losing more than half of their staff, of their journalists, that has an impact because there are fewer people to go out and catch the news. So there are fewer people to distribute that news. Now, as for francophone communities, if we can't discuss amongst each other and we can't discuss with other Canadians and to public decision makers, well, we will no longer be able to move our cause forward. Local media is essential. And when we appeared before the committee, one of the discussions I had with one of the members was that even you members depend on local media to get your messages through, to speak to your constituents. Aside from those who live in Toronto or Montreal or the major urban centers. All others, in order to get their messages across, must use local media. And there are fewer and fewer of those local media outlets, and there's fewer and fewer opportunities. When you look at the television side, tonight, ce soir en Ontario, there's a 1.5 minute on Timmins. So when you look at the Timmins area, there are 29,000 francophones living there. And you go to the English side, which is MCTV, which covers everything from Barrie down, and it talks about the Timmins regions for a whole 3 minutes on average per newscast. So we've got a lot of problems getting our messages out. I listened to all the panelists. I found it very interesting what they had to say. But we, as a local community and as a local association, for us, we want to know whether in 10 years we'll be able to get our messages across, and we believe that might be difficult. In Northern Ontario, that region was the most severely impacted from the latest cuts to the corporation. So it's very worrisome for Northern Ontario.
29th meeting, and you were there, I'm sure. You remember me trying to just get a straight answer from him why he said very clearly in the media at the middle of the crisis of funding for CBC, when CBC was trying to get bridge financing, and he said there was never any discussion at all about the loan against future appropriations, which I found very odd because it was clearly in the article, and he said, of course, I was pulling headlines out of thin air and stuff, and I went back and I checked it, and sure enough, it was a very clear and definitive statement, probably as definitive as his statement was at the meeting that he said there would be no further cuts to CBC. And now we're seeing $56 million being identified. It's very hard for us, I think, at this point to take the minister's word that he doesn't have a vendetta and his government doesn't have a vendetta against the CBC. When you were sitting there, did you hear a very clear enunciation that the attack on CBC was finished as far as he was concerned? Because it looks like it's just starting.
Mr. Chair, a very brief answer would be yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, and with that, Mr. Del Mastro, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to our witnesses, thank you for appearing before us today. I guess for the benefit of my colleagues here, there was a couple of good things that came out in the releases today. Of course, one is that 5% of the CBC's budget is now $56 million, which demonstrates evidence, frankly, Mr. Chair, that the total budget is over $1.1 billion, and I'm glad that that's officially out on the record. That's, of course, what we've been saying for some time. Secondly, with respect to strategic review, Mr. Chair, I just pointed out to the entire committee that strategic review is a process undertaken by all departments and all parts of the government, and it does not mean, of course, what the strategic review purpose is to indicate those processes, those operations of the department that are the 5% least efficient. It is not about cuts, and any reference to that is completely false. It's about value for taxpayers, and it's about being effective in spending taxpayers' money. Now, perhaps people on that side of the table aren't concerned with that, Mr. Chair. I can assure you people on the government side, people on this side of the table are very concerned in being effective and efficient with taxpayers' dollars. That's what strategic review is about. There is no inconsistency in what the minister said. He has promised more than $1.1 billion in funding for the CBC, and that's what they will get. Now, with that clear, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move on to Mr. Lithgow. I thought that you made a couple of very good suggestions, Mr. Lithgow. You talked about, first of all, you said our broadcast system is one of the least diverse in the world, and you talked about revenue streams at local television stations depending on national ads. I'm not sure if you saw, we had Jim Pattison Group here giving a presentation. We had Chorus giving a presentation on local television stations that are truly local, that are actually running advertising campaigns in their local areas. They're not being fed very expensive national programming and so forth, and they're actually doing pretty well. We've also seen a couple of stations that apparently can't work being picked up by a company that, frankly, would have no interest in picking up losing affiliates. I'm just interested in asking you said the affiliated system is failing, not local television. Can you expand on that just a little bit for us?
I'm sorry, could you repeat?
Well, you said the affiliated system is failing, not local television. We've had a couple of witnesses from Chorus and Pattison Group come in and indicate just that, that they actually feel that local television does work. Can you just clarify that for us a little bit, what you mean about affiliated television and local television, the difference between them?
Our sense is that there's a disconnect between the concerns and priorities between a media organization, a small broadcaster that's actually locally owned, that exists primarily to provide informational services in a local context, and an affiliated station that's sort of caught up in a web of complicated financial arrangements that really have nothing to do with the local markets. In addition to, I mean, it's nice to hear that there are people sort of focusing on local advertising markets. I think that's a step in the right direction. But generally speaking, the local modus operandi really has to do with connecting national advertisers with eyeballs rather than a priority of servicing communities. And I think one of the key pieces here is that the idea of an LC3 is that it functions as a self-sustaining economic organization that provides local programming, but it doesn't have the kinds of shareholder or debt demands that you find in a purely private sector, in a where there isn't sort of a multiple bottom line. And so it just gives them more freedom to work in a smaller market.
Okay.
And sustain for a longer period.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Morrison, you spent the first majority of your presentation talking about over-the-air, people receiving over-the-air broadcasting. And I have some interest in that. Now, the numbers that you're given, are those just the numbers of people that aren't subscribing to cable or satellite, or is that actual confirmed numbers of people that are watching television over the air?
It is the latter, and the survey by Canadian Media Research was based on a sample of 1,500 Canadians drawn from those who did not have satellite or cable service. As you may know, Demastro, those people constitute about 9 to 10% of the population.
Right. Well, and you're right. We are aware 9% of households either don't subscribe to satellite or to cable TV. We just don't know if they're watching television or not, largely.
Okay, time's up. 5 minutes is up.
Okay.
We now go to Ms. Fry, please.
Yeah, Shelley's.
I just want to go back to what this is all about. It's about the evolution of the television industry in Canada and its impact on local communities. And I think the big question here, and has always been, is that local communities are no longer having access to programming. And I don't know if Mr. Morrison remembers, I did ask the Minister that the last time, using Kamloops as an example, which is not a tiny community at all. And I think the Minister basically didn't answer my question. I think he just flubbed it off that if Kamloops cannot get broadcasting, Kamloops has a problem, and that's the end of it. The question here about local communities is that, as so what was well said, that local communities need to get local news. However, when we talk about CBC in this issue, CBC has a direct mandate to be able to represent regions of Canada to each other. So the mandate of CBC to get into small communities is also as pertinent as small local programming, local television stations, radio stations. I think, so we agree that CBC has a huge role to play in meeting the needs of local communities. Now, we've also heard from everyone that CBC is in dire need of funding because its ability, its transmitters are going down, its ability to broadcast in small communities is being affected. And therefore, as you well know, and I think I remember definitely Mr. Morrison being at our CBC review, when we were looking at CBC, we spent a long time, we came up with a very good report that suggested that CBC was in need of more funding, as Mr. Morrison said. The bottom line here is this. If CBC is in need of more, not less, nor of status quo funding, and if CBC doesn't get that funding, does any one of you have an idea what will happen with regard to local programming that comes from a national level and that represents region to region, so that small regions can understand each other? Can anybody tell me what would happen if we leave CBC at the status quo?
Écoutez, on a la preuve présentement.
Well, you see evidence today with the cuts announced last month in Northern Ontario, and the regions were severely impacted. We're not talking about Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, which were impacted. We're talking about Northern Ontario, which was decimated in the English market and last year for the Francophone market. So clearly, if there is not a redistribution of funding and we don't ensure through policy means that local media be prioritized, then clearly there will be disappearances of that whole sector, and CBC will no longer be able to play its role. The corporation has a role to talk about Canadians from coast to coast to coast. And it's becoming increasingly difficult for people in Northern Ontario who are wondering whether we'll have a role to play.
Of course, the management of the CBC needs to be at arm's length from government decision-making, otherwise it would be a state broadcaster. But that doesn't mean that we cannot criticize some of their decisions. And faced with the situation, the regrettable situation of the cuts that were made a month ago, one of their managers said that what they would do is identify the cost to reach a given individual and where those costs were higher, they would make more cuts. Well, if you think about that for a minute, it means wherever you have a huge community like Toronto, you have a huge denominator, therefore the cost per individual is going to be lower. So whoever made that decision inside the CBC was automatically discriminating against Timmins James Bay, against Kamloops, against Newfoundland. Excellent. And so that is not something that should have happened, but I think you have to look at it in the context that, as your committee established a year ago through a careful study, the corporation needs more money to do its job. I've submitted to you today that public opinion is supportive to that. Not just supportive, very supportive. I mean, 26% of Canadians were opposed to your recommendation. 20% thought that your recommendation was too low, and 54% supported. That's pretty strong, you know.
Thank you very much. Do I?
We're going to move on to Ms. Lavallee. Lavallee, please.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Lacroix.
Thank you. Mr. Lacroix, earlier you said that the Canadian government could help broadcasters by advertising. But are you not concerned that that could see a negative side? We saw with the former government buying advertising to help a number of festivals. And in the end, you know what happened. That ended up turning into propaganda, and that ended up with the sponsorship scandal. So I don't know. I wouldn't be ready to support such a measure, all the more so, and I'll let you respond later, but to help GM, the Canadian government has never thought about buying vehicles. That is not at all the option. They're giving GM money or credit lines or other tax measures. But if they want to help broadcasters, if the government wants to help CBC, would it not be better to give it direct funding rather than buying propaganda in all the television media? Well, there were two recommendations. One of our recommendations, we're a bit more generous than what the committee was last year. We thought per capita funding should be $50. We know that there are millions and millions of dollars spent in advertising by the federal government, and we all know that for good reasons and for all kinds of reasons. So that money, which is spent, there should be a way. We're not talking about creating a new program, but we should make sure that the distribution of that advertising money be equivalent for smaller markets and larger markets. That's what we're saying with regard to that recommendation. But don't you believe in the current state of affairs? There are hundreds of $millions in government advertising. Do you not think that officials that manage those programs manage them in terms of their needs? And if we encourage them to place ads in local media, we would be creating an environment that would lead perhaps to what we saw with the sponsorship scandal. Well, what I would say is that when money is spent, there's always a potential for scandal. We know that. What we're saying is that there's a lot of money that is spent. We just want to make sure it's better spent. Currently, as you know, GM is almost in bankruptcy, and all ministers are using Toyota vehicles.
That's not fact. Can we please have anything to do with facts at this committee? That is factually incorrect.
I know it is, and I was going to correct, so I wouldn't. I would think that you should check a little closer, Ms. Lavallee. That's fine. Carry on, please, and be factual. Be factual.
Je vais le prouver. Je vais revenir.
I'll come back with a list of vehicles, but that was an aside. It was just an aside. I'm a bit confounded now.
Took some time. You have 1 minute left.
Mr. Morrison, you have a broad, comprehensive view of the broadcasting industry in Canada. were you able to notice that there are two types of problems, one in Quebec and one in the rest of Canada, and that indeed there are two types of solutions that are called for?
English and the French audiovisual systems are very, very different. As you know, the popularity of programs in the French language and particularly inside Quebec is immense. It's quite possible to get a substantial portion of the population of Quebec watching one signal at one time. That does not usually exist in English-speaking Canada, except for the most popular Hollywood programs. So the two are very different, and I think the broadcasting policy has recognized that over the years. The CRTC is exceptionally sensitive towards the need of the Francophone community, and as you know, the budgets of organizations like SRC, CBC are not chopped on a population basis, but in order to provide some equilibrium. So Canada has been a flexible country in the last 50, 60 years with respect to the differing needs of the two systems. The group I represent is preoccupied with the English language side, which is, of course, continually washed with satellite rain from the United States of America.
Okay, thank you.
Merci.
Next question, Ms. Glover, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to welcome you all here, as I did at the very beginning, but I have to say that this meeting has taken a turn for the worse. I feel incumbent to correct some things that have been stated here today because they tear at my core. There has never been a situation in the House of Commons since I have arrived where any person in any party has ever clapped at the thought that CBC might fail. So I want that to be put on the record to show that that has never happened.
Point of order, that's not correct, so I think she should strike it. We could go all the way up to the minister as to who was heckling about CBC. We've all witnessed it. So I just think, just stick to your questioning.
Let's not go there.
Stick to your questioning.
We're not getting in the debate. We're not getting in it.
It's ridiculous.
I want a little peace. I want a little peace. I allowed this side of the House, this side of the witnesses to say pretty well what they wanted to say about the government, and I am going to allow this side of the table to make a response. And if that's not the case, I won't allow anyone to say anything against the government. So as I said, this side of the table said what they wanted to say. This side of the table is going to have the right to defend their rights.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to make sure that everyone understands here that my time has got to be extended a little bit. I do also want to make this comment to all of the witnesses because I hate to see you misled. And I was a police officer 19 years. This type of thing should not go on with leaders of our country. But I want to clarify that the strategic review was put in place several years ago. CBC was well aware of it several years ago. It's unfortunate someone's picked this timing in the media to bring it out as if it's something new, as if we are kicking them when they're down, as someone said. It is not true, and I just want to put that on the record. Now, I want to turn to some very important facts that relate to our study, if we can get back to that. Mr. Morrison, you commented on your third page of your dissertation about over-the-air viewers being concerned about not being able to afford cable and satellite charges, and you went into some explanation about the United States. And I wanted to know, are you aware that Bell TV was here last week proposing a very, very complementary solution to this?
You're referring to what they call FreeSat?
The FreeSat, yes.
The CRTC asked me to comment on that just 5 days ago, and I've just sent them a 4-page letter, and I'll be happy to send it to you. But a few points. It's not free. It would cost, in our judgment, something in the order of $500 up front to get access to it. Their business model, by the way, I'm not criticizing FreeSat. It's, I'm just putting a few things on the table.
Okay. You know what, Mr. Morrison, I hate to interrupt you. You have a 4-page document. I'd gladly read that. I only have 2 minutes left, and I really want to get to on-screen before they disappear.
Manitoba. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. But I would like to see your 4-page answer.
Through me, through the chair.
Please, thanks. And on-screen Manitoba, thank you for being here because I know how important your work is to television and to our community in particular. You mentioned LPIFs, and I really want to know how much do you think you would need out of that fund for it to be effective for your organization?
Want me to talk or you? Well, it's very difficult to discuss a fund. It's very difficult for us to discuss a fund that doesn't exist yet, and we're not sure what it would, how it would be stated or how it would be structured. So what we feel is that they're talking about 1% or 60 million, 1% of the BDU's revenue or $60 million. Our concern, we can't specifically say how much of that should be spent where, but our concern is that it be very much directed to local programming. It doesn't cost a lot of money to make a lot of difference in local programming when basically you don't have any. But we are also strongly suggesting that some of that money go to independent producers to produce local programming because we provide the different voices. Again, not to harp on consolidation, but there aren't a whole lot of different opinions within the owner groups of the broadcasters these days, and two of our main broadcasters also own newspapers. So we feel it would serve both the country and the production community and the broadcasters to diversify. Documentary production is significantly less expensive than drama, for instance. The figures I quoted were for drama production. So we would hope that that 1% would hold, if not go higher, and we would hope that it would go directly to local programming, and that about 25% of it would be earmarked for independently produced local programming.
Very good.
Very, very short, please.
Right, based on the benchmark already created within the system for priority programming.
And I do know that you have some collaboration with Production Rivard, which is also, it benefits our Francophone communities as well. And so would you want the LPIF to also take that into consideration?
Sure, absolutely. Having diversity within the fund makes a lot of sense. We also have members that are Aboriginal creators. We'd like to see that as well be a target.
Okay, very good.
Thank you very much. And I say to our witnesses, you're all very important to this hearing. Thank you very much for your presentations. And I will recess right now for to regenerate our witnesses, and we will reconvene in exactly 5 minutes because we
Donc je sais, ok.
Deux journées en une demain. Comme ça, je vais avoir mon vendredi de congé.
we're going to reconvene for the second half of our meeting today, meeting number 20 of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage, pursuant to Standing Order 1082, Study on the Evolution of the Television Industry in Canada and its Impact on Local Communities. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to kind of reverse our order. I want to have the National Film Board of Canada to make a presentation first, and so I'm just going to go backwards up the list, and so what we'll do again, we try to keep our comments, our presentations to 10 minutes. I know we have a lot of witnesses. If we can stay to 10 minutes, and then we will do at least one round of questioning, and maybe the second round we can have a short time. We do have to be done by 6:30. So again, I start off with the National Film Board of Canada, please. Yes.
Simplement pour fonctionnement, je vous inviterai à...
I would ask you not to suggest that they keep the 10 minutes, but force them to remain within a 10-minute timeline, so we can we have enough time for questions.
But I will, under Mr. Rodriguez' rigidity. Now we've taken a minute out of someone's presentation. So, National Film Board, please.
Bonjour. Je suis content d'être ici.
Good afternoon. I'm pleased to be here with you today. My name is Tom Perlmutter. I am the Government Film Commissioner and Chair of the Film Board. With me today is Claude Jolicoeur, the Assistant Film Commissioner.
Impact of the crisis on television industry in Canada's local communities. For 70 years, we've celebrated our 70th anniversary this year, the National Film Board has played a vital role in Canadian society as a public producer and distributor of audiovisual materials in the public interest. We are, among other things, recognized for our leadership in the production of documentaries, animation, and digital media. In the past 6 years, the NFB has earned 5 Oscar nominations, 2 Oscars, Emmy nominations, Best Short Film Award at Cannes twice, competed at Sundance, Toronto Film Festival, other major festivals around the world. This year, Hot Docs honored the NFB with the kind of programming focus it reserves for national cinemas. As well, the festival paid tribute to our great Aboriginal filmmaker Alanis Obamsawin with a retrospective of her works and an Outstanding Achievement Award. In October, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences honored the NFB with a tribute in Washington. Last month, Cannes awarded the NFB a gold medal in recognition of our outstanding services to world film and television. We are, without a doubt, Canada's best-known international cinematic brand, and this allows us to serve Canadians in all regions by ensuring a strong Canadian presence in a globalized, digitized universe. And interestingly, with this international reputation is built on our commitment and connection to local and regional communities, which touches on the subject today. Because many of the activities that we undertake are designed to occur in the realm of what we call market failures, that is, creating public goods with long-term social and economic benefits for local communities and for the Canadian public. It means undertaking activities such as technological innovation, but also developing emerging creators across the country, working with filmmakers from Aboriginal, ethnocultural, and official language minority communities, offering a media service to underserviced communities, and innovating in new forms of expression where the market on its own cannot afford to take the risks. We provide a forum for creators to develop new forms of authentic and relevant audiovisual works that communicate diverse Canadian points of view at home and to the rest of the world. These are public goods with long-term social and economic benefits for local communities, for the audiovisual industry, and for the country. And point out also that we play a very crucial role in marking the major changes and events taking place in Canadian society and ensuring that they connect to all Canadians. We did so with the celebration of Quebec's 400th anniversary. We distributed, with the help of Heritage Canada, 26,000 box sets to schools and public libraries across the country. This is phenomenally important in ensuring that regional voices are heard throughout Canada and are part of the fabric of our country. And we're currently in partnership, for example, with the Vancouver Olympic Committee to use new digital media to engage Canadians across the country, to have their voices heard and to share with each other what they have to say. But we are not a broadcaster. However, we are part of the wave of the future. Today, in the midst of technological and economic upheaval, the NFB is applying its creative powers to the multi-platform digital environment by exploring possibilities of new technologies, testing new business models, and ensuring distribution to remote and underserviced communities. We are providing Canadians with a range of possibilities. The transformation from analog to digital formats is the basic technological change that is profoundly altering the audiovisual sector at all levels. It's affecting audiovisual conception, development, production, distribution, exhibition, and the nature of social engagement through media. The transition to digital formats is creating new exhibition platforms that are reshaping the environment and fragmenting audiences, and obviously having a profound impact on local broadcasting. But it can be a positive one because it allows also for those local and regional voices to find their place in ways that they may not have in the past. Digital technologies offer more flexibility in conception and development. Digital technologies offer the possibility of fulfilling demands by racial, linguistic, and other minorities for highly specialized and personalized niche programming that responds to regional needs. The Film Board, as a national federal institution, is committed to such communities and committed to ensuring that they talk to each other, that we share. And we're committed to the younger generation of filmmakers and the younger audiences. Many countries in the world today, particularly in Asia and Europe, are pushing ahead in accommodating and promoting digital technology by articulating a digital vision. Canada is starting to lag behind, something that we need to be concerned about. And it's something that the NFB feels that we need to take some leadership on. And so we are moving ahead in terms of digital creation, digital distribution, to kind of show proof of concept in a range of ways. For example, we pioneered the development through a pilot project of one of Canada's first e-cinema networks. Our project in New Brunswick and l'Acadie brought together 5 communities and gave them access to works that they would normally not have access to, a cinematic expression of their communities and communities across Canada in French. This was a first and was remarkably appreciated. It's been now going for almost a year. Access to our collection of audiovisual materials is essential for all Canadians and a priority. In January, we launched our national online screening room, which now offers 1,000 titles from our 13,000 title collection. It's a treasure trove of local information and stories in both official languages. And with the click of a button, viewers can connect to the pulse of Canadian life and creativity across the regions of the entire country. We are also strengthening our role in the local educational market. Because we are a trusted provider of regional content and a valuable partner for Canadian teachers, the NFB is increasing its online offering and reaching Canadian youth on the platforms of their choice. And for example, in partnership with Alberta Learning, the NFB offers over 100 films online to all schools in Alberta. Much like the community screenings that still remain important to us and to the communities we work with, web broadcasting of works, our works and stories serves to bring Canadians together. New media is attracting ever-increasing audiences, but local television programming, local news, continues to play an important part in the political, economic, and cultural life of our country. It delivers information and entertainment. It provides an important contributing element to community sharing and building. Conventional broadcasting remains important. It will remain important in the years ahead. And in fact, one of the projects that we're currently doing is we'll be releasing a film shortly that looks at the major impact a local radio station has in a small community, Fort McPherson in the Northwest Territories, directed by Dennis Allen, a filmmaker from Inuvik. Now, we don't produce local news ourselves. We can't provide those broadcasting opportunities. Well, what we try to do is fill the gaps that can't be done elsewhere. I mentioned our participation in the 400th anniversary of Quebec City, where we did exactly that and made it available to all Canadians. We are currently working on a multi-year major project on residential schools. It's a way of telling the stories from regions across the country behind the very moving apology delivered by the Prime Minister last summer. We have regional production in both English and French program that comes from across the country. Sabrina's Law is produced in the Prairie Centre and aired last year on Global Television and tells a story that affects Canadians but comes from a particular place. The Big Drive is a short animation film by award-winning Anita Lebeau from Winnipeg. It tells a story that is profoundly anchored in the experience of growing up on the prairies. But I can assure you that this very particular, very regional story will travel the world. We have productions from Newfoundland, from PEI, from across the country. Radiant City, a film by Albertan Gary Burns, was a story that was very much set in Calgary, found audiences across Canada, around the world. We do kind of programs in the Yukon, in Nunavut, and l'Office national de film aussi, on le fait en français, on a fait beaucoup de projets à travers.
We've done a lot of French language productions, not only in Quebec, but in Acadie, in the north, and that is crucial to ensure the production of works that cannot be produced otherwise. And I come to my conclusion. We are in a profound period of change. We need to adopt a global approach.
The way, but as an industry, and in terms of public policy, we need to take a larger and a longer view. We need to bring private and public sectors together in a partnership to craft a national digital strategy that will form the basis for the creative economies of the future. We need to ensure that the infrastructure needs are there. We need to put in place advanced digital networks. We need training. We need to evolve new business and financing models. Les défis auxquels nous sommes confrontés peuvent être des occasions.
The challenges we are confronted with can be excellent ways to surpass ourselves. We need to come together in this adventure and have a vision for the future.
Into unprecedented opportunity, if we dare, if we're bold enough, if we have the vision. Merci.
Thank you. Now we move on to Syndicate de Communications de Radio-Canada.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président Schellenberger.
Good afternoon, Chair Schellenberger, ladies and gentlemen, committee members. I chair the union at Radio-Canada. My name is Alex Levasseur. With me is the vice chair of the union, Ms. Micheline Provost. Our organization was founded 41 years ago. It represents over 2,000 members, including 1,600 who work very regularly for the corporation in Montreal, throughout Quebec, and as well in Moncton. Our members are essentially the people that you hear on radio, that you see on television, and whose articles you read on the internet. These are also people working behind the scenes who prepare the content of those shows, make them possible. We work in news broadcasts as well as in general interest radio shows. With regard to conventional television, we are increasingly absent because of the choices that were made in the past. Trends, if I look at trends, I would be here before you with the green or orange-colored hair. I'd have rings in through my noses. My jeans would be voluntarily cut, and I'd say to you, "Yo, man." But I resisted those trends. Many before me are following the same path, that is to set aside old public institutions and to follow the path of the future, private paths towards private broadcaster and producers. I am asking you to resist that trend. Quebecers, as never before, are attached to the Société Radio-Canada. A survey that was conducted last month, and my colleague Chantal Larouche will talk to you about that a bit at greater length, shows it clearly that 67% of Quebecers place great emphasis or importance on SRC television with regard to culture. And that figure goes to 73% when they are asked about news quality. The well-known actor and comedian Rick Mercer said before your committee a few years ago, "We enjoy the CBC and we hate it at the same time." Why? Because CBC is to broadcasting what vegetable are to food. Without the support from the Canadian Parliament, it is our entire intellectual food that will be impoverished. Last March, the CEO of CBC announced budget cuts of $171 million and 800 layoffs. Last Friday, he informed us that the federal government would add another $50 million to the cutbacks. Therefore, there will be additional layoffs and reductions in programming. Where will this all stop? And yet, in 2003, the chair of the Canadian Heritage Committee, Clifford Lincoln, made recommendations for a multi-year stable funding on an increased basis. You yourself, Mr. Chair, did the same in February 2008 and recommended to increase the Radio-Canada CBC's annual funding to $40 per Canadian per year. So what happened? In fact, the opposite has occurred. Our union went on a consultative tour. We met with our union members throughout Quebec and in Moncton. They spoke to us about their working conditions, and let me tell you that they were quite critical. Everywhere we heard people suffer from a lack of work means, suffer from the lack of replacement workers for newscasts, suffer from the lack of visibility on the national signal. Allow me to say that the recent cuts have really crushed them. A number are concerned by transmitters, digital cameras, and the latest gadgets. What will all those tools be of use if the only thing we have to broadcast is American shows translated in French, or to revisit the old TV series? Within the crisis that the television industry is going through, it is television content which is endangered, not high-definition digital transmitters. This morning, Guillaume Lepage on a radio show, and I would like to quote as a conclusion, "It's as if the government did not realize that investing in culture is like investing in roads, in the public service, or in health. It is not only a collective need, but it also is very interesting economically speaking." You are, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, committee members, the best place to make sure that your recommendations are followed. What do you intend to do for CBC Radio-Canada have stable multi-year funding and on an increased basis so that the regions have a fair public service, or to develop content for new platforms and emerging platforms? What do you intend to do so for the French language culture is broadcasted throughout Quebec and Canada? Thank you.
Our next presentation is Fédération Nationale de Communication.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for having agreed to hear from us. The Fédération Nationale des Communications represents nearly 100 unions with a total membership of some 6,000 print and electronic media practitioners in Quebec, Ontario, and New Brunswick. Our union represents most Quebec unions of journalists and technicians working for the major newspapers and public and private radio and television networks, including those of the CBC. The Federation wishes to begin pointing out that the committee is studying a very complex issue. Throughout the years, the committee has produced extremely important and relevant reports, which unfortunately did not receive all the attention needed from Parliament. It appears urgent that the Canadian government adopt the recommendations that have been produced by the Committee on Canadian Heritage, but also by the Senate Committee, which dealt with the concentration of media ownership in order to protect the future of the television industry and public interest. The profound changes have led to needed changes to ensure the viability and the sustainability of the industry, but also to reduce the risks of increased weakness in our social, cultural, and democratic values. We need to guarantee low-cost access to quality Canadian services, both locally, regionally, and nationally. The right of Canadians to independent news should also be protected. We must recognize the importance of the public broadcaster and give it all the means necessary to fulfill its mandate. Television today is where Canadians go to get their news. Local newscasts must remain a priority of the Canadian broadcasting system. Our federation believes that the corporation or the CRTC was wrong in not asking TQS to ensure newscasts. Conventional broadcasters must broadcast local and national news services. The Federation also deplores that CBC has withdrawn morning newscasts and is making it only available for cable subscribers. The financial pressures put on the industry are numerous. However, it is possible to improve the situation. It is important to rebalance the funding of specialty channels and traditional conventional media. CRTC figures show how conventional broadcasters are in dire straits. In order to preserve conventional broadcasting, we must provide it with additional revenue from the fee-for-carriage regime. New media, the fragmented audiences, changes in listenership and consolidation do have an impact on local broadcasting. Some solutions, therefore, will ask broadcasters to review their business model. The CRTC must also strengthen its policy and force conventional broadcasters to produce local and regional shows, as well as news and information programming. Currently, the only incentive that leads local broadcasters to create content is the one that forces them to do so if they want to have access to advertising revenue. We believe the corporation could do better. The CRTC figures show that between 1998 and 2007, there has been no true increase in local advertising spending in both French and English markets. However, spending on foreign shows have increased by 61%. The major consolidated groups for the benefit of Canadians, it is important to change the current trend, which is abandoning local services and centralizing TV content in major urban centers. In a context of multiplying distribution platforms, local shows could become a nexus for conventional broadcasting development. Our federation hopes that the LPIF encourage broadcasters to invest in local programming. The transition to digital will, of course, entail significant costs for conventional broadcasters. However, for a number, the renewal of equipment coincides with a normal replacement period. That being said, terms and conditions for broadcasting can be reviewed. And we believe if there are other ways to distribute signals, it will be up to distributors and broadcasters who could amalgamate their financial and technical resources to provide distribution services free of charge. The size of the Canadian market, the ease to access foreign content make it all the more important to maintain public funding for TV programming. We believe that the new media fund, which was recently created, contains a number of imperfections. However, it has the merit to put an end to certain discrepancies and which ensured a monopoly to independent producers. We are concerned, however, by the fact that the Department of Canadian Heritage has withdrawn from the corporation the 37% reserve funding. The loss of that guaranteed funding makes the national public broadcaster more and more vulnerable. The parliamentary votes given to the public broadcaster have decreased by $300 million compared to the mid-1980s. The Canadian Parliament must follow up with the latest report by the Canadian Heritage Committee, which recommended multi-year stable funding over a 7-year period, as well as an increase of that funding, raising the limit per capita from $34 to $44. I want to insist on that to say that the survey commissioned by the Federation last April indicates that 80% of Quebecers believe it is important that the Canadian government increase, if needed, the funding to CBC Radio Canada to ensure its development. 73% of survey respondents disagree with the decision of the Canadian government to refuse the temporary interim funding asked for by the corporation. As for the possibility to restrict broadcasters from the national public broadcaster from advertising, we are not ready to say that this would help the industry, as long as we don't have certainty that there will be multi-year stable funding from the government and to correct mistakes of the past. In conclusion, the broadcasting industry is in a structural crisis which must be resolved through sustainable solutions by maintaining and strengthening conventional broadcasters, which play a social, cultural, economic, and democratic role in our society. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Now we move to the Communications, Energy and Paperworkers Union of Canada, please.
Thank you for your invitation to appear. My name is Peter Murdoch. I'm Vice President of the Communications, Energy and Paperworkers Union of Canada. CEP is Canada's largest media union. We represent more than 20,000 workers in Canada's media, including private sector broadcasters, specialty TV services, independent film and television, and Canada's newspapers. With me today are Jim Holmes, who works at A Channel CTV Barrie, and Monica Auer, our legal counsel. Our written remarks referred to in tabs in a second document, copies of which we have given to the clerk. We welcome your study. The letters and petitions you have been receiving show how Canadians value their local TV stations and local news, especially now when information about their own communities is so vital. Both this committee and the Senate's Communications Committee and other committees, reports that have been done by the ministry, have done excellent work. All parties contributed, done excellent work, and we applaud that work. But the problem is that too few of your recommendations about broadcasting, regulation, and local news have been accepted, including the Heritage Committee's 2003 recommendation that a local broadcasting initiative program be created to assist in the provision of radio and television programming in the community, local, and regional levels. That was in 2003, your committee. The CRTC in particular has ignored your concerns about highly concentrated ownership. It accepted broadcasters' claims that creating media giants would strengthen our broadcasting system and keep weaker stations alive. It ignored the looming too-big-to-fail problem and told Canadians their concerns about unmanageable debt and loss of diversity were misguided. The benefits of consolidation would outweigh all these problems, said the CRTC. Worst of all, the CRTC did not make promises about local news legally binding. And when broadcasters began to break these promises, it refused to act because the promises weren't legally binding. So here we are today, having spent billions, local TV stations, broadcasters now having spent billions buying local TV stations, broadcasters now say they're too expensive to keep. Broadcasters plan to slash local news hours in the harmless-sounding name of harmonization and threaten to close OTA TV stations altogether. But only broadcasters know the real story. No one can question the figures they have given the CRTC because the CRTC won't disclose these figures. But the CRTC has been printing individual specialty and pay TV service results for years. Why hasn't disclosure hurt them? And since the CRTC used to disclose individual stations' financial results for license renewals, why has it been fighting our access to information requests for more than 2 years, even for such basic information as the number of people each TV station employs? As all we know is this: no one can challenge what broadcasters have been telling the CRTC because we don't know what is being said. It's especially ironic that when interveners challenge broadcasters' arguments, the CRTC asks interveners to prove broadcasters are wrong. With what exactly? The data the CRTC refuses to disclose? The simple fact is this: aggregated figures show local TV programs have made more money than they cost for most of the last 20 years. Broadcasters' real problems are excessive debt and reckless foreign spending, all enabled by the CRTC and its irrational, outdated view that deregulation is the best way to regulate oligopolies in the public interest. We understand that broadcasters' first duty is to their shareholders, and they are caught in the current temporary economic downturn. But the CRTC's duty is to Canadians. It is more than an expert tribunal. It is Parliament's deputy. It should implement the Broadcasting Act in the public interest and according to the rule of law. Frankly, we were shocked when the chairman of the CRTC told us last Monday that finding original news is hard. Maybe that explains why broadcasters are rerunning their 6 p.m. and 11 p.m. newscasts the same night and the next morning to meet their local programming promises. The CRTC also seems surprised to learn that most TV stations now use their studios for storage, and that most TV stations no longer produce and transmit their own newscasts. Instead, programming centers miles away control the station's studio's cameras, their feeds, and their transmitters. If a hurricane hits Halifax tonight, someone in Edmonton would have to decide whether to let the CanWest station there run an alert. CTV operates most of its stations out of Toronto. We have concerns about the LPIF, not just because it is too small and only broadcasters in the CRTC would know how it is being used. The real problem is that it will not raise spending on local programs. It should really be called the Status Quo Fund, not an improvement fund. We urge you to instead consider a local TV fund to strengthen local content. The CRTC does not have to raise subscriber fees to do this. It could take the money from the subscriber increases it gave to cable systems for capital projects years ago. This money went into the base rate but never came out. Second, we urge you to re-examine the Broadcasting Act. Its goals are simply not being met. For instance, Parliament said broadcasters must use predominantly Canadian resources, but the CRTC is letting private TV broadcasters spend less on Canadian programs now than in 1994 and double their foreign programming spending. Last year, for every dollar broadcasters spent on Canadian programming, they spent $1.25 on foreign shows. Buying CSI takes money away from local news. Parliament also said that Canadians should have employment opportunities in our broadcasting system. But opportunities for jobs are shrinking because the CRTC lets private broadcasters cut or eliminate original local news on radio and TV. Should the CRTC promote employment in this sector or not? Parliament said that the CRTC should decide who should have the privilege of holding broadcast licenses. But rubber stamping transactions for the last 20 years has led to the situation where broadcasters are dealing stations like poker chips through ads in the Globe and Mail. This isn't just insulting to the communities these broadcasters claim to serve or gut-wrenching for the employees, but a clear signal that the CRTC has lost control of its own mandate to decide who will offer Canadians the best programming service possible. It is true that Parliament receives annual reports from the CRTC, but while it has the data, the CRTC isn't exactly telling you how much closer it has come to achieving Parliament's objectives for our broadcasting system. It doesn't even tell you how many hours of original content our broadcast system produces, how much of that is news, excluding ads, or which stations are or are not following the rules. It took an access to information request just for us to see the CRTC's bylaws. Should we know if Parliament's diverse objectives for Canadian broadcasting are being met or not? Parliament also said that programming in Canada should reflect local communities. But it might surprise you to know that the CRTC has not made local news broadcasts mandatory on either TV or radio. There are no regulations about this. Should the CRTC make broadcasters' program promises mandatory or not? Parliament said as well that the CRTC should hold public hearings when it renews or amends licenses, if that serves the public interest. But the CRTC is now expelling the public from its hearings. It doesn't help Canadians understand what is happening, incidentally, when the CRTC allows and encourages applications to be changed from one day to the next. I'm going to wrap this up soon. Parliament probably assumed that the CRTC would enforce the Act, its regulations, and its decisions. But although regulatory noncompliance has almost become routine, the CRTC still declines to rely on the use of all of its powers under the Acts to sanction or deter noncompliance. And CEP has now had to go to court for the second time to try to get the CRTC to examine serious breaches of and under the Act. Finally, Parliament probably assumed that the CRTC would serve the public interest because the current Act doesn't actually spell that out. But the CRTC regularly meets broadcasters behind closed doors, even in the middle of licensing proceedings. Its decisions routinely dismiss other stakeholders' requests, and its policies merely pay lip service to Canadians' concerns. Now the CRTC wants the powers to fine the same broadcasters it meets behind closed doors. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, our broadcasting system faces real challenges. That is why we are urging you to support a local TV fund that is accountable and transparent. This is critical. Whatever fund we develop here, whether it's fee for carriage or whether it's the LPIF, it has to be accountable and transparent. We do not want to add more recommendations to the excellent recommendations made to Parliament in the past, but we are offering a few doable things this committee can recommend that can get done. First, we recommend that you give the CRTC clear and detailed directions to initiate financial support for local programming. This fund must be accountable. It must enhance or maintain local news programming. You must require the CRTC to monitor and report annually on the fund's use, station by station. Second, we recommend that you review the CRTC itself to make it more democratic, more accountable, and focused anew on the public interest, instead of constantly reworking Parliament's objectives to maximize income for broadcasters. Third, we recommend that Parliament revisit the Broadcasting Act to ensure that its principles are being addressed in broadcasting and digital media and with a fully resourced public broadcaster. Fourth, and like the CRTC, we recommend Parliament move towards a more coherent Communications Act, capable of dealing with our interconnected broadcasting and telecommunications system. We believe our recommendations are within your mandate and responsibilities. Parliament and Canadians are entitled to accountability and transparency as their access to vital information is being withdrawn. We think it is time to move on. Let's get some of these recommendations done. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our last presenter, before we go to questions, the Canadian Media Guild, please.
Let's see if I can move this. I guess not. Okay, thank you for inviting us to appear before you today. My name is Lise Leroux, and I'm the National President of the Canadian Media Guild. We represent workers at the CBC, at CanWest, and other media employers across the country. Beside me is Marc-Philippe Laurent. He's the president of our branch at the CBC outside Quebec. And behind me, because of the size of the panel here, we have two of our other colleagues behind me. Karen Wersig is our Policy and Communications Coordinator, and Brian Olson, beside her back here, is our consultant on OTA issues, where we've done some original research. There are three main areas we'd like to cover today. First, the crisis at the CBC and Radio-Canada that is forcing the cut of 800 jobs and undermining local programming, and now word of a threatened new funding cut of $50 million or more. Second, we'd like to see government add to the Local Program Improvement Fund, currently being developed by the CRTC. And third, participation by the government and Parliament in the transition to digital TV to make sure that 1/3 of Canadians don't get left behind.
La Société Radio-Canada, CBC, est un élément fondamental.
CBC Radio-Canada is a fundamental element of Canada's broadcasting system. The public broadcaster provides 29 local services across the country on the radio, television, and internet. This makes the public broadcaster the single most important cultural driver in Canada. Moreover, the corporation provides services that the market will never be able to provide, especially in local services, regional services, and smaller communities. These are services that Canadians depend on for news, public affairs, and entertainment. These services allow them to take part in our public life. You are no doubt aware of the 800 jobs that were cut or will be cut at the public broadcaster. There are two reasons for that: a drop in ad revenue during the economic crisis, but especially the compound effect of inflation on the public funding given to the corporation. Last Friday afternoon, we learned that the corporation could again be threatened by further reductions of up to $58 million following a strategic review of its budget launched by the government. Such a cutback would be devastating and would prevent the initiatives that were announced by Mr. Lacroix before the committee. That is the restoring of local services that were affected by the recent cutbacks. We urge you to do everything in your power to stop the threatened cutbacks by the government.
Is facing the possibility of another, the threat of another cut. Something that could be as much as $58 million under the strategic review program launched by the government. This is on top of the cut to the public broadcaster that the public broadcaster is currently dealing with. A new cut, I have to tell you, would be devastating and would obviously negate any efforts now being made by the CBC to try to restore local service in the areas currently being hit hardest by the service cuts this past spring. So, we have to implore you, and we do so with heartfelt feelings, we implore you to do all that you can do to stop this review and stop this possibility of another cut. Comme vous le savez bien, les crédits parlementaires.
As you know, the parliamentary votes are modest in comparison with the public funding given to national broadcasters in other industrialized countries. Parliament gives the corporation only $34 per Canadian per year. That amounts to a little over $1 billion for all the 29 services. However, the average among 18 OECD countries is $80 per year per citizen. Now, if the Canadian funding met the average of those industrialized countries, the Canadian government would this year provide over $2.6 billion in votes credits to the CBC Radio-Canada.
CBC will receive from Parliament this year is the same in constant dollars as it received in 1995. And when adjusted for inflation, that funding is worth $360 million less this year than it was in 1995. In 2005, the then president of the CBC, Robert Rabinovich, at McGill University, in a public statement, stated, and I quote, that the CBC had not had a red cent increase in its programming budget in 25 years. That was 2005. This is 2009, and I don't think anything's changed. And there lies the crux of the problem. Even without further cuts, the public broadcaster struggles year by year with declining spending power. And unfortunately, we know over the years that it's the regions and local programming that have been squeezed hardest by the financial restraints. Ce sont vous, les membres du Parlement, qui avez la solution.
You, parliamentarians, have the solution. We ask you to implement the main recommendations of your report published in February 2008. In particular, we're asking for the government to draw up a 7-year agreement with the corporation, establishing increased funding and indexed to inflation. In the past few weeks across the country, citizens have shown their opposition to the reduced services by their public broadcaster. Yesterday in Windsor, over 300 people denounced the closing of the sole French-language radio station serving southwestern Ontario. A few weeks back in Sudbury and Thunder Bay, hundreds denounced the reductions in the services in Northern Ontario. And such demonstrations are seen across Canada. Citizens are realizing that they're slowly losing their voices and the reflections of their communities. That is why we're asking for an immediate increase of $7 per Canadian per year to the public financing, as recommended in your February 2008 report. That would help restore the threatened services, improving local and regional services across the country, especially in communities which are developing but which do not enjoy local Canadian services from their public broadcasters. For instance, the French language station in Windsor could be re-established.
John, Sydney, with proper, stable funding, the CBC could also be looking at setting up new radio stations to better reflect and serve communities such as Red Deer in Alberta. The time to act is now. We plead with you. C'est maintenant le temps d'agir. On ne doit plus tarder.
To act is now.
The cities that Marc Philippe just mentioned are among the smaller cities in the country that have suffered most from cuts to their local media. Hamilton is another place that doesn't enjoy local CBC service, and it's poised to lose its only local TV station, CHCH, owned by CanWest, as you know. Local TV programming is as important as ever. We know that people of all ages continue to turn to TV to find out what's going on and to find live, quality, local programming that is simply not available on the Internet. We believe that the government should support the Local Programming Improvement Fund being developed by the CRTC using revenues from cable and satellite providers. If the government participated in the fund, the way it will in the new Canada Media Fund, the additional money could be used in part to finance initiatives such as the one being proposed by the CHCH employees and leaders in Hamilton to try and save local TV there. And obviously the money from the fund must be available to CBC and Radio-Canada for improving local news as well. And you need to be aware of another big development in the industry that's going to change the way people connect with their local TV stations. You've heard about it earlier today. In fact, in just 2 years, 1/3 of Canadians could lose free over-the-air TV. Why? Because the signals you get right now are analog. In 2011, TV in Canada is going digital, something the U.S. already did this year. And what does it mean? It means broadcasters will be shutting down their analog transmitters, but they've said they only want to put the new digital ones up in the largest cities in Canada. That means some 10 million Canadians will lose access to free local TV just because of where they live. Among the communities proposed to be shut off, Gander, Grand Falls, Edmundston, New Brunswick, Rimouski, Sudbury, Chatham, Thompson, Manitoba, Red Deer, Alberta, Kamloops, and Kelowna. You get the idea. We've identified 977 communities that are slated to be cut off by the broadcasters in the research that we did by Brian Olson, who I pointed out earlier. We have researched alternatives and are proposing a model called multiplexing that allows up to 6 broadcasters to share a single transmitter, share the costs. This will reduce the costs immensely from what the broadcasters claim it will cost them about the transition. Multiplexing is now done all over the world, including in Ottawa, right here, by the Sun TV station, which is broadcasting 2 digital channels over the air from a single transmitter. We believe it's a solution for Kamloops. The CRTC chair even told us so last week when we proposed our model there. You may recall, you committee members who were on this committee last year may recall the outcry when the people of Kamloops lost their free over-the-air CBC service. The issue was the subject of a large section of your report last year on the CBC mandate. Our solution would allow CBC to return to the public airwaves in Kamloops. We estimate that the total cost of installing the necessary digital equipment there would be in the order of $160,000. Shared 6 ways, the cost per broadcaster would be about $26,000, hardly unaffordable. All viewers would need is a $60 converter box. I have a prop here. Here's one, $60, all you need. And, or if they had a new TV, they wouldn't need any additional equipment to get this free over-the-air TV. They wouldn't have to pay a monthly cable or satellite bill, and they'd get 6 channels. We think it would satisfy a lot of people. What's more, they would have free access to good range of Canadian programming. And after all, providing Canadian programming to Canadians is a #1 priority of the Broadcasting Act. So, is there a role for government in this model? We believe there is. First of all, someone needs to tell the broadcasters that it's a priority to serve Canadians no matter where they live, and that their plans are not good enough, and that it's not okay to assume Canadians in rural parts of the country should be satisfied with having no choice other than to pay for cable and satellite. I see you, Mr. Schellenberger. And doesn't mean I'm going to stop.
Mr. Rodriguez, Mr. Rodriguez, I'm sure is going to have a question for you.
I'll answer further questions about this later on.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rodriguez, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question goes to the union representing workers at Radio Canada. Were the 800 jobs cut? The 800 people who've lost their jobs, have they been informed that they would be losing their jobs? No. Currently, at the Syndicat de Communication de Radio Canada, we still do not know exactly where those cuts will take place. The corporation has implemented an early retirement program. That program was offered to employees under certain conditions, and we still don't know the results of that first step. That is, the people who want to leave voluntarily. Once that step will be done, we will better know the true impact of the layoffs. And we do have a committee that will be meeting this Wednesday. Ms. Larreau on the English side. With regard to CBC, there will be 393 jobs cut. No, as of today, we don't have the list. But does that not create a bad environment? Well, yes. It's uncertainty. Those people still don't know whether they'll lose their jobs or not. That's very serious. Well, we know basically in what sector the jobs will be shed, but not in particular. Are you consulted in this process? Yes. With regard to the layoffs, not for the time being, but as I indicated, there's a voluntary early retirement package that's on the table. We don't know the effects of that program, but we weren't consulted. I don't have much time. You were consulted? Well, we weren't informed of which positions would be cut exactly. Now, how does CBC Radio Canada ensure the regional priorities when they decide on which jobs to cut? Do they say, well, we don't touch regions, and so it's people with less seniority in regions won't be affected? I want to try to understand the process. Well, my understanding is, and Mark Phillip could complete this, but the corporation has adopted, well, what wants to protect the gathering of news information in the regions. People have kept their jobs with regard to gathering of news. But in regions in Quebec, there are no longer people who can ensure on RDI the staff necessary, whether it be or in Moncton or in Quebec City. We're talking about additional cuts. We've seen that in the papers, an additional 5% reduction in total funding, the $1.1 billion given by Ottawa. And that's enormous. We're talking about $56 million in additional cuts. What does that mean in terms of jobs? Well, the 800 jobs represents about 600 million, or 800 million. Well, they've really pared the corporation down to the bone, Mr. Rodriguez. Services are threatened. The corporation's services, I'm not talking about parts of service, I'm talking about complete services that are threatened. And not to mention the sale of capitalizations and real estate. Now, if 56 million is withdrawn, that could be a few hundred more jobs cut. Well, I don't think we can measure that in number of positions. My chair could perhaps give you a greater accuracy in that regard.
Dollars in perspective. You're looking at, say, a quarter of the entire budget of English radio. You're looking at a third of the budget of French radio. I mean, $50 million is a lot of money at the CBC. Let's say the strategic review goes through and the CBC does what it's been asked to do, which is identify things that could be cut. And let's say at the end of the day, a year from now, the government doesn't cut it. We don't know. It's a threatened cut and it's sitting there. But let's say it doesn't cut. We still have an enormous problem of chronic underfunding, of years and years and years of funding that has not caught up to the cost of living, and is way below international standards.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Lavallee, please.
Oui, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Following along in the same lines, you've had 800 layoffs, sale of assets. You've seen a drop in advertising revenue, fragmented viewership. And there are places like the Bitibi where no cuts were made because there wasn't anything left to cut. So how are you living that? So that's my first question. How are those cuts felt at the corporation? And what is left to cut? And are you part of the strategic review? Go ahead, Ms. Larouche. Well, as for the strategic review, we're not part of that review. The unions are not part of that. And they don't want our opinion on that, and that's clear. But if you had to give any advice, you have an open mic now. We're listening to you. Well, clearly, regional services are important. But I'd say what's most crucial, and I'm perhaps repeating myself, but with the cuts that we've already seen this year and the announcement that was made on Friday, clearly the corporation's capacity to fully meet its obligations is imperiled. And I'm speaking on behalf of our federation because we had a convention last week. That is a purely ideological choice. It has nothing to do with funding. It has everything to do with the will to marginalize the public broadcaster. And don't forget that not too long ago, there was the possibility that the government bring direct funding through grants to the private sector. There seems something wrong there. So how are people reacting on the ground? How are people feeling? Well, our members are very vocal. They know that in some time, if things continue as things have been announced, well, CBC Radio-Canada, people are going to say we don't need that service anymore. And that's, in our view, in the current government's plans. You say that CBC Radio-Canada will no longer be able to fulfill its mandate. Well, especially in serving all Canadian regions. So that means fewer local shows. And it's already been announced. The corporation has already announced in its programming in Quebec, in the French language sector, perhaps the same thing on the English side, significant cuts with regard to shows produced in Canada. Original content. And the choice is to acquire foreign shows. And another thing as well is that clearly in terms of news and information there will be a deficit gap. We cannot, with such a broad territory as Canada's, serve in both official languages with very few resources, ensure coast-to-coast news coverage. So it represents a clear democratic deficit. I want to make sure I understand. Do you really believe that the Conservative government is throttling the corporation than to say, well, let's get rid of it because it cannot fulfill its mandate? Well, that's what it looks like. That's how we see it. Mr. Lorrain? Well, I fully agree with the analysis. Everything seems to point to that the current government is taking advantage of the economic crisis to hit another hit at the corporation. CBC Radio-Canada, as I indicated in my opening remarks, year after year after year has seen decreases, has had to shed jobs. We're doing more with fewer people. You know, I only have 5 minutes, so Mr. Lafosseur? Well, it's an important element I want to bring to your attention, and I saw this in the past 30 years. I've seen cutbacks in that time. When CBC leaves a region, stops providing coverage, well, immediately private broadcasters do the same thing. They say they no longer need to challenge the public broadcaster, and they can leave. So it's a double whammy, because the public broadcaster has exited, and so the private sector says, well, why should I remain there?
Thank you, Speaker, and I'm very sorry we only have 5 minutes because I have so many questions. So I'm going to move very quickly, and I'm going to be very impatient, but it's not that I don't want to hear long answers, it's just I have no time. I'd like to ask a question, Madame Leroux. Getting an answer from the government on the CBC is sort of like sticking your tongue out in a funhouse mirror. We can't. Everything comes back really distorted, and they tell us it's not. We just heard that this $56 million cut is not really a cut; that in fact it's been planned for years, and there was something nefarious with the CBC in not coming forward and making the government look bad. My understanding was that CBC was singled out last week for the strategic review. Is that correct?
My understanding is that the CBC was informed last week or the week before. The staff at the CBC was informed last week. And it should be clear, it hasn't been singled out. A lot of government departments are subject to this review. But at the same time, it's strange to us that the CBC is seen as a government department. That seems to poke a lot of holes in the issue of the arm's length relationship, and that worries me on top of the $50 million and all the rest of the problem.
Thank you. Mr. Murdoch, I remember when we were talking back in 2006 when they had the very bold merger where CTV decided to swallow up its #2 rival in the city of Toronto and pick off a whole whack of very, very valuable stations. And at the time, they made it clear they were not interested in 8-channel. They wanted to dump those. CRTC came back and said they were going to impose some very strict conditions on CTV because they were allowed so much massive media concentration. And here we are 2 years later, and the nature of the crisis is the 8 channels, which they never wanted in the first place. Have they followed their license?
Well, I think as we pointed out, the nature of the crisis at the CRTC, look, these local stations were given licenses. They have been described universally both by broadcasters, by the unions, by citizens, by public interest groups, as the cornerstone, the very foundation of Canadian broadcasting. Now, if we can't find a way, Parliament can't find a way, or CRTC can't find a way to ensure these stations keep on going, we are abandoning Canadians. So it's not a question of whether or not CTV wanted them or didn't want them. We're not talking about a Christmas present here. We're talking about licenses, the foundation of the broadcasting system. And let me, if I can very quickly, Mr. Angus, just follow up. For the past 40 years, various royal commissions, committee hearings, inquiries have all been advising and recommending against consolidation of ownership, every one of them. And yet the CRTC has allowed this consolidation to continue, and now we have Canada's largest media empire with $4 billion in debt and on the brink of CCAA. It's a national embarrassment. Where was Parliament and where were our regulators? You have made some wonderful recommendations. We just need to ensure that they're adopted and put in place.
Oh, Mr. Murdoch, when I look at every CRTC decision, it's always predicated on the fact that we need to do this in order to help local. We need more mergers. We need to give them the specialty TVs. Yet every time we have a renewal license come up, we find the restrictions are way too onerous for any broadcaster to be able to operate profitably. And then when we look at how much they're actually being obligated to come through with it, to us, and we're just amateurs, but it doesn't seem like it's all that much. So in terms of the onerousness of the licenses, I was trying to find out the last time a television station had ever been charged with non-compliance of its license, and I don't see anything in the last 20 years. What are the percentage of stations that have been in non-compliance with the license? Are you aware of that? And when they are in obligation, breaching their obligations, does the CRTC have any tools, any steps that it takes to make them be within compliance? Because clearly the message we've heard is that CRTC obligations for local and for Canadian content is much too onerous for this business climate.
Well, let's separate first of all. We are aware, as all Canadians are, that there is an economic downturn right now. So this business climate is unique. It'll pass. Broadcasters will come back. The economy come back. And, you know, away we go. This, right now, we're in a moment unique in our history. So that's aside from that. It's not a matter of being onerous. First of all, very, very few broadcasters actually have local programming and local news as a condition of license. They make promises and commitments that cannot be enforced. There's no penalty there. They just make these. And, you know, when CTV was looking at the last round for the city TV stations and stuff, it brought up broadcasters. I'm sure many of you were in Parliament when they had all their anchors there in Parliament to greet everybody and how wonderful local news was, and Three Cheers. And what happens after that? They're closing stations and they're reducing local news. Now, come on, which is it? They'll say one thing at the time of trying to get the licenses, try and woo you with some things when it seems necessary, but after that, once they have the license, those commitments end up being abandoned.
Thank you. Mr. Damasco, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses. I've just been, as the presentation's been going on, I've been doing some basic math. I'm a finance guy. At least that's what I took at school. I just basically figured out, since the funding low of the Liberals that occurred in the late 90s, the funding to the CBC is up 38%, based on figures that you've given to me. You indicated 5% of the budget was $58 million, or could be as much as $58 million. That would indicate funding from the government of $1.16 billion. I took the funding low of about 10 years ago of $800 million under the Liberals, applied an annual inflation rate of 3%, compounded over 10 years, and came to a funding number, a total funding number of $1.075 billion that would have been the amount under the Liberals keeping pace with inflation. But we know that we've actually exceeded that based on your own testimony here today. So based on your testimony, and that was if inflation was 3%, but we know the Bank of Canada has had a target rate of 2%, and I don't remember the annual inflation rate ever being at 3% since 1998. So I just wanted to make the point, and the only reason why I've gone through some of the finance calculations that I've been doing while you've been here is to indicate that the one half of your argument that the government funding hasn't kept pace with inflation actually isn't true. Based on your own numbers, it's more than kept pace with inflation. Now, you may be making the argument that it hasn't been adequate, but that's different than saying that it hasn't kept pace with inflation. Now, I want to go now on the other thing that was really troubling, and I heard Ms. LaRoche and Ms. Leroux was nodding, and Mr. Lauren, you were nodding as well, that you think that the current government has, got it in for the CBC. I'm just going to paraphrase. But I've got from the Friends of Canadian Broadcasting on October 31st, 2000, I just ran this off today, and it says, now the Liberals, they cut about $400 million or 33% from the CBC's budget. I'm told 4,000 people lost their jobs. The president of CBC quit. Does the Liberal Party have something against the CBC as well? Is that what we're establishing? The Liberals had a vendetta to eliminate the CBC. Is that why they cut 33% from your funding?
I'll start with this. Look, I didn't answer the last question, and what I've been saying.
Okay, so then I'd like Ms. LaRoche to answer.
Just excuse me.
No, it's my time.
No, my answer is this to your question.
Okay, but I want Ms. LaRoche
just hang
to
on.
answer the question.
We can switch over to him, but the problem right now, and let's get away from partisan politics.
Well, no, because
just
there's
hang
been
on.
partisan
The problem
remarks made by the witnesses.
just hang on. The problem is
Mr.
the
Chair,
relationship with the government of the day, and that's any day. It's today. It was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and the CBC. That is the problem. Your committee identified this last year. We need a 7-year contract between the government and the CBC so that we're not subject to these annual
Come on, Mr. Chair.
budgetary discussions.
Yes, and I'd like Ms. LaRoche to
Ms. LaRoche,
answer.
do you feel that the Liberal Party also had a vendetta to get rid of the CBC, since they actually cut money from the CBC and we have not?
En fait, ici, je vais répéter un peu ce que Mme Laroux.
I'll repeat what Ms. Leroux said. We're not here to.
Remark. You said that the government, do you believe the government of the day is against the CBC? Do you believe that the government that actually cut money from the CBC was against it?
Just 1 second until we get some order here. I don't want to have to use my gavel. I've never used my gavel to get order yet. And we will stick to the questions. Again, there were some questions that came from this side of the table
and I
didn't stop the answers coming from the other end. It is this side of the table is asking the questions right now, and I respect an answer from the other end. If we're not going to get that without intervention, then the question has been asked. If you don't want to answer the question in front of this committee, then send the report, send the reply through me, and I will send it. Carry on, Mr. Damasco.
Pardon, Monsieur le Président.
I apologize, Mr. Chair. I did not say I did not want to respond to the question. However, I did start by saying that we weren't here to engage in partisan politics. At this time, and I'll repeat what Ms. Leroux said, at this point in time and in the evolution of Radio-Canada, the current government is putting pressure or reducing the funding to CBC Radio-Canada, and it's the government in power. We're not saying the Liberals never did such things.
Right now. The point is, we have not reduced funding to the CBC, not a dime. In fact, we've only increased funding to the CBC, and your own numbers back that up. In your own testimony today, you indicated that 5% of the funding was $58 million. I've heard $56 million. Regardless, it's more money than what the CBC was getting when we took government. It's more money. Yes, it is. Absolutely. I'll give you my calculator when I'm done. Please.
Is that a question?
I think that's a question.
You're welcome to respond to what I've asked. My question is, do you believe the government of the day?
I was answering.
Since you're saying that you think that our government has a vendetta against the CBC.
Well, let me
we're
answer
trying to
the
shut
question.
them down.
Let me answer
Do you
the question.
believe that the Liberal Party had the same objective when they cut 4,000 jobs and $400 million?
I believe Ms. Lavallée asked if what our members were feeling and what was the sentiment in our members with the current round of downsizing and cuts at CBC, and I believe her question was, do you feel that the government is against the CBC? And I responded, certainly is the sentiment, and it's the sentiment of the membership that I represent. Our folks feel that there's always been a battle between the two. When it comes to the numbers, I believe attached to your document,
any government, between any government and the CBC?
Now,
I was asked if our members felt that this government was negative towards the CBC. They said yes.
Okay.
That's the question I answered.
Question over. We've gone over time. Mr. Sims, please.
And now for something completely different. Wasn't that a ball? Now that we've dealt with question period, as per this afternoon, I just have a couple questions about some of the themes that came out of your testimony. Interested me because we were talking about fee for carriage, we are talking about the local improvement fund, all of these things. Do you feel that in the absence of any regulations, let me put it another way, what is required? What is required of you, or you think that should be required of broadcasters when it comes to a local improvement fund or any type of money that helps subsidize local funding?
I don't know. I'll just take it very, very briefly. The first thing is accountability. That is, supposedly once this fund is set up, it's set up for a purpose, and I think it's incumbent to ensure that that purpose is met. It's not a slush fund for broadcasters. It's not just something to go to the bottom line. It's targeted, and we have to have accountability and transparency on it. It's also for original hours of news programming, primarily. And that is different than simply repeating news or calling pet horoscopes or something news. It's not news broadcasting.
Now, if the government had made a statement that, yes, we're recommending that this local improvement fund be, have all the stipulations, all the disclosures, all the transparency, and the regulations to boot to make sure that local programming objectives are fulfilled, then what you're saying is that in order for the CRTC to do this, it's going to last for just a short period of time, and then we're back to where we were before. In other words, because the broadcasters don't fulfill these commitments, it doesn't really matter.
Well, A, we would like to see some sort of enforcement to it, but B, it seems to me, and I think we've got the cart before the horse here a bit, if we have a commitment to local news and local programming, if we believe that Canadians deserve that in whatever community they live in across the country, then let's ensure that they have it. Now, if the broadcasters have a little downturn in the economy, maybe they need some help. If they have an upturn, maybe we can deal with that as well. If it seems that, wait a minute, this is a permanent structural problem, as the broadcasters claim it is, which I'm not sure it is, but let's suggest that it is for a minute, then we need something like fee for carriage, which is permanent additional funding. I don't know, maybe my colleagues would...
Very quickly, our union called for having the fee for carriage and having that money specifically allocated for local news. And the LPIF, the Local Program Improvement Fund, was a little bit of an offshoot of that recommendation. We are saying that the LPIF, the current plan for it is to be funded out of cable and satellite fees. We're saying that it should be matched by government money. And what I'm also saying is that I think that we should get going fast on the LPIF to help what I think is a wonderful project at CHCH, which is the idea of local ownership of local stations, and get that project going and use it as a bit of a test case.
Okay, I think I read you loud and clear on that one, and it was one of the comments that came from Mr. Murdoch, but too few recommendations have been accepted by the CRTC. And, I agree with you. I agree wholeheartedly. Because I think there is, and one of the reasons why I wanted to call this together was to provide some kind of direction from Parliament as to what CRTC should be doing. But my goodness, I'm seeing it time and time again where nothing is being followed and recommended. Who is talking about a long-term 7-year commitment to the CBC? Outside of us? Nobody.
Right. Well, look,
well, except for yourselves and certain interests, and I appreciate all the information you gave me.
No, but I think this committee, other committees, other royal commissions, other inquiries, for years have been calling for a fully resourced public broadcaster. It's not new. The question is, why hasn't anything been done about it? And I don't care which party. Why hasn't anything been done about it? And the degree to which the CRTC can lend its weight, that hasn't happened either. If you ask me why, catatonia. I don't know.
Should the CRTC then actually consider, and this has been brought up before by other witnesses, get into the business of sanctioning? Obviously, it's something without teeth. Is that a correct, fair statement to say? Because really, you either revoke the license or you don't. And in which case, you want the type of sanctions in order to make them behave in a certain way that the government wants them to.
The current Broadcasting Act makes it an offence to breach either a regulation or condition of license. The CRTC can also issue mandatory orders currently. It has issued mandatory orders, but even though those have in turn been breached, the CRTC has not followed it up. But at the courts, there is already a legal remedy in the Broadcasting Act. So then
but is that legal remedy too cumbersome?
Mr. Sanders,
no.
we can't get into the dialogue because that's the end of the answer. We've got to move to Ms. Lavallee. We've got one more question over here, and we've got to get this meeting over.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, the point of order I wanted to make earlier was not to prevent the witnesses from answering. It was to ask Mr. Del Mastro to respect our panelists because he was preventing them from answering. But I have a great respect for your chair. I did not come back to that. Thank you. I have a few questions. But first a comment. To follow up what Mr. Del Mastro said earlier, that his government was the most generous towards the corporation. Nevertheless, in the document by the Canada Media Guild, you believe that Radio-Canada's deficit in constant dollars is $354 million. And in the document here by the Fédération Nationale des Communications, you estimate that to be $300 million. But you're not very generous. Your boss is Hubert Lacroix. He, in his document tabled here, which I do not have with me, I think it was page 23, he estimated to be $400 million compared to 1990 in constant dollars. So I don't know on what figure you want to base yourself. But nevertheless, most people who have appeared before a committee or all of them who have talked about Radio-Canada's CBC's deficit have spoke about a significant deficit in the past 20 years. And the only ones who say the opposite are the Conservatives. Ms. Larouche, I want to talk to you about the survey. Earlier, we heard from the Friends of Canadian Broadcasting, and they gave us their survey, which was quite interesting, which was done with 943 Anglophones. According to their figures, 54% of their respondents agreed to increase to $40 per capita per Canadian per year the budget funding to the corporation. And you conducted a survey with 1,000 respondents in Quebec. Whereas in Quebec, we have a sense of belonging to the corporation. Their ratings are excellent. We don't have the same competition with Hollywood. But we see that only 57% of Quebecers want to maintain the funding. So the figures are a bit perplexing. Well, that is probably tied to the various questions that were asked. You have to, globally speaking, the results of our survey clearly show that 80% of respondents have said that they're attached to the corporation and they're willing to increase funding if need be. And if you talk about specific figures, so we're wondering if the methodology involved confuse people, because people say they're ready to invest more in the public broadcaster, and they also say that 86% of them want to ensure adequate funding to CBC Radio Canada. But when time comes to pay a specific figure, well, people say, no, $34 is enough. But when we prepared that survey, experts at the polling firm said that you have to avoid biases. And we said that perhaps we should introduce information that would allow them to understand that elsewhere public broadcasters receive $130 per capita per year. People said, the experts said that no, in terms of methodology, it better not introduce those figures. Nevertheless, when we look at the figures, what shows clearly is that 80% of respondents want to protect CBC Radio Canada, its mandate and its mission. And at the same time, those people say that it doesn't make sense that the government in power has refused the request for interim funding. 73% of respondents said that, and 60% said they were against the government's funding through to the private sector. I see Mr. Lorrain who wants to react to that. But I want to add something before Mr. Lorrain comments. Now, what's more surprising is that our committee did an excellent report last year, and that our recommendations were clear. $40 per capita per year. Stable multi-year funding with a memorandum of understanding, and $60 million integrated into the base funding, and the government did not respond to the report. Mr. Lorrain, I simply wanted to add that when we talk with francophones about the CBC Radio Canada, people think of the national network. When we talk to anglophones about the CBC, they talk about the national network, but they forget about all the other services. When we sit down with Canadians and we explain the 29 services and how many languages and all that the public broadcaster does for $1 billion, people start to better realize what's going on. With regard to the 400 million, if you look at the document we prepared, yes, I'm coming, Mr. Schellenberger. If you look at the document, you see that in 1990, we're about at the same figures, 400 million. So the comparison between historical funding and the in current dollars show that today the CBC Radio Canada, compared to 1990, is underfunded by $400 million.
Literature here, so that's fine. Mr. Bernouge, the last question, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the testimony from all the witnesses today. I'm just going to perhaps follow up on some of the testimony that was delivered a little earlier in relation to the line of questioning that Madame Lavallee was putting forward. Madame Leroux, as far as I remember from the testimony that you delivered in response to a question from Madame Lavallee, when she asked, did your membership have a sense that the current Conservative government that the Conservative government had it in for the CBC, you indicated in the positive, as did Madame LaRouche as well. And on that, sorry, I'm still asking the question here. You'll have a moment to actually answer in a moment. But in relation to that, I guess my question will be for you and for other members of the panel. Does your organization have a mandate to express a partisan sentiment on topics such as that? And do you take official positions? I don't really know, because I'm not sure of the mandate of your organization. Perhaps you do take official party positions in relative to public policy items, and if that's the case, so be it. Then I guess you would be fulfilling your mandate. But in the event that you didn't, do you see that comment as being outside of your mandate in relation to communicating in the public on these matters?
I'm not too sure who you're speaking to. I will start by saying my union has a policy of advocating for issues within the media worker issues, for lack of a better word, issues affecting this industry. We do advocate for those things. Now, Mark, did you have other things?
I don't know if you were addressing me. I know there's Laro, Lorrain, and Larouche here from across the room. I wasn't sure if you were talking to me, Mr. Bernard. Again, all I said is, when my members, I was asked the question, what do my members feel? And my members do feel that this government is hostile towards the CBC as a whole. I was asked, I was being honest. I'm giving you an honest answer. To say no would be not serving my membership, because that's not what they're telling me. So I was asked an honest question. I'm giving you an honest answer. Is it founded? Is it legitimate? I can't tell you. Can't answer that question right now. We find ourselves very often here in Heritage asking the same thing. So.
How did you come to that conclusion? Do you survey your members, or is this anecdotal information that you're presenting?
Sorry, I missed that question.
Is this how do you survey your members to come to that conclusion that you made?
After the last round of bargaining that we just completed, we meet our membership on a regular basis, and they call us at the office, they email us, they.
I'd get off.
How many?
It's a difficult question for us.
And how many of your members have indicated that they feel that the current?
I don't think that's the.
Is hostile.
Okay, I don't think we're going to get anywhere with that.
Move to Ms. LaRoche and then Mr.
In fact, our members are expressing a real concern and facing what they're going through. But it's not a partisan position. I want to correct that. If it were another government in power we'd see the same problems, we'd say the same thing in the same manner. We did so in the past, and we'll probably be doing it in the future. But it has nothing to do with taking a partisan position. That's wrong to conclude that.
To respond.
Sorry, Madam LaRouche, if I could just have a follow-up question with your statement. How did you receive an indication from your membership? Was there a survey? Could you give us a plurality statement in relation to your membership as to the position that you put forward? Or is it just your anecdotal information that you believe that your membership suggests?
This isn't anecdotal evidence. We've just been through a convention. Our members have expressed their views on the current situation, and our members are saying it's disastrous. It's dramatic for the future of the public broadcaster. And so that's concretely speaking. It's not a political position. It's what they're going through today.
On the topic of whether or not the current Conservative government had it in for the CBC, was that a ballot item at your convention?
Listen, I'm repeating. This is not a partisan position, and we're not against the Conservative Party. These are decisions that were made by the government.
Is Mr. Levasseur pleased to? He'd like to answer. I'm going to take his answer, and then we're going to. I am going to have a final statement because I have something for the National Film Board. Okay, go ahead, sir.
Merci, Mr. Schellenberger.
Thank you, Mr. Schellenberger. Well, I'd say the following. I am before a Parliament of a committee of Canadian Parliament. I see parties, all the parties. I saw the report produced by the committee in 2008. I read the report produced in 2003. And my organization wants to ensure that you implement your own recommendations and decisions. You unanimously, each and every one of you around this table, said that you were in favor of a multi-year stable funding on an increased basis. You wrote it in 2008. So I ask you, what are you waiting for to properly implement what you promised you would do? And that's why I'm here. I'm mandated by my members to say so.
No more time. I am going to thank all my witnesses, or all the witnesses, for being here today. I have one statement. It's primarily a statement for the National Film Board. It's 70 years the National Film Board has been there. I am very concerned with local broadcasting and Canadians knowing about Canada. Back when I went to school, which wasn't 70 years ago, but a lot closer than a lot of people in this room to that time, we learned a lot about Christopher Columbus and Marco Polo and Magellan. And in our school system, we didn't learn much about Canada. It was through the National Film Board that we used to once a week or once a month go out and get that old reel, and the principal would come with three reels of film, and we would have an hour and a half of National Film Board about whether it be the polar bear, whether it be seals, whether it be Inuit communities. And so I learned a lot through the National Film Board. So anything that I have learned, I would hope that the National Film Board could take a little credit for that. And I thank everyone for being here today. And, and with that, meeting adjourned.